Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science. You're already here, already sinking, eyelids heavy as if gravity itself has decided to gently increase just for you. The room is dim, maybe lit by the soft glow of a screen you swear you'll turn off any second now, and your thoughts are beginning to stretch out, slower, like honey warming in a jar. Somewhere in the background, the ordinary world hums along, cars passing, pipes ticking, the neighbor's dog reconsidering its life choices, and your brain is preparing to do something strange and wonderful. You're about to go offline, but not really. And yes, you probably won't survive this, in the sense that staying fully awake is about to become a heroic but losing battle. So before you get comfortable, I'm going to take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling cozy enough, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there, because nothing bonds humans quite like collectively being tired at different longitudes. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin to notice your breathing before you mean to. In, out. The body knows this ritual well. As you lie there, your brain is already changing gears, shifting from the sharp, chatty rhythms of the day into slower, rolling waves. A mainstream fact that sleep scientists agree on is that sleep isn't an on-off switch. It's a gradual descent through stages, each with its own electrical signature.
Yes,
In
oh my
electroencephalograms,
God, yes.
those spiky line drawings of brain activity show this clearly. Your neurons don't go quiet. They reorganize like a city switching to night shift. And here's the curious part. Even as you drift, signals keep arriving. Sound waves still brush against your eardrums. Pressure still presses into your skin. The world does not stop knocking just because you've decided to nap. Instead, your brain decides what to do with those knocks. Most get muffled, softened, politely ignored. But some important ones are handled differently. This is why you can sleep through a thunderstorm but snap awake when someone whispers your name. Evolutionarily speaking, that's a feature, not a bug. If our ancestors slept like unplugged phones, none of us would be here to listen to this. Historians still argue whether early humans slept more lightly than we do today, but anthropological evidence suggests that in environments full of predators, total sensory shutdown would have been, let's say, suboptimal. Your brain learned to rest with one eye metaphorically open, and it never forgot. As your awareness softens, a structure deep in your brain called the thalamus starts acting like a bouncer at an exclusive club. Its job, broadly speaking, is to route sensory information. During wakefulness, it's waving almost everything through. During sleep, it folds its arms and starts saying no, but not to everything. Scientists long believed the thalamus completely blocks sensory input during sleep. Now that idea is looking a bit like believing your phone is off when it's actually just on airplane mode. A quirky tidbit from sleep labs. Researchers have found that sleepers can respond to certain stimuli with subtle physical changes, like shifts in breathing or heart rate, even when they have no memory of it later. Your body heard something. You just weren't invited to the meeting. You feel yourself sinking further now, thoughts loosening their grip. The day replays in fragments, a sentence you wish you'd worded better, something you forgot to buy, that one song your brain insists on looping. This isn't random. A well-established fact is that during early sleep, especially in non-REM stages, the brain begins memory consolidation. Experiences from the day are replayed, strengthened, or quietly filed away. Signals from waking life echo internally, long after the external versions have faded. And yes, this means your brain is essentially doing homework while you drool slightly into your pillow. Multitasking icon, but external signals don't stop either. A door closing somewhere in the building, a change in temperature, even a shift in light through closed eyelids. Your sleeping brain samples these inputs, deciding again and again whether they matter. Historians still argue whether this selective listening is purely mechanical or shaped heavily by personal experience. Why does one person sleep through alarms while another wakes at the faint click of a phone unlocking? Your past trains your sleeping brain what to care about. There's a famous historical example from the mid-20th century when researchers discovered that mothers could sleep through almost anything except their own baby's cry. Other babies, silence. their baby, or an instant alert. The brain had learned the signal. It tagged it as urgent. Everything else could wait until morning. As you drift, there's a faint, comforting absurdity to all this. You're unconscious, but not really. Offline, but still receiving notifications. It's like putting your brain in do not disturb mode, except emergency contacts can still break through. Somewhere an engineer is nodding approvingly. Your muscles relax further. The boundary between thought and sensation blurs. You might feel like you're floating, or falling, or suddenly jerking awake because your brain briefly forgot the rules of gravity. That little jolt, the hypnic jerk, is another reminder that systems are still talking to each other. Signals misfire, corrections are made, and you sink again. In sleep, scientists still debate just how much information the brain can process without consciousness. Historians still argue whether sleep has always been this fragmented or if modern life has trained us into lighter rest. But what's clear is this: sleep is not silence. It's a low-volume conversation. And as the room fades, as your thoughts slow to the point where even worrying about whether you're asleep yet feels like too much effort, your brain keeps listening. Not intently, not anxiously, just enough. Like someone resting on a couch with their eyes closed, half aware of the TV murmuring in the background, catching only the parts that matter. You don't need to do anything now. The systems are running on their own, signals will come, most will pass by unnoticed. A few will be noted, sorted, gently stored, and you will keep drifting. What deeper into this strange, active quiet where rest and awareness overlap in ways we're only beginning to understand. You're not fully gone yet. If anything, you're hovering in that soft in-between where thoughts arrive half-formed and then politely excuse themselves. Your body feels heavier, like it's settling into a mold shaped exactly like you, while your mind begins its slow elevator ride downward. This is where the stages of sleep start to matter. Not as textbook labels, but as lived sensations you can almost feel if you pay attention long enough before drifting off entirely. Sleep scientists divide sleep into stages for convenience, but your brain experiences them as shifting moods. In the earliest stage, often called N1, awareness flickers like a faulty porch light. A mainstream fact is that this stage only lasts a few minutes, yet it's packed with strange phenomena. Drifting imagery, sudden muscle twitches, the feeling that you're both awake and not. Signals from the outside world still slip in easily here. A voice in the room might blend seamlessly into a thought. A sound might become an image. The brain hasn't decided what to ignore yet. You might notice that sounds feel different now. Less sharp, more symbolic. A car passing outside doesn't register as a car. It becomes motion or distance or a vague sense of movement. This is your sensory processing beginning to reroute. The thalamus, that quiet gatekeeper you met earlier, is starting to change how it forwards information. Not blocking it outright, just softening the edges. Historians still argue whether ancient philosophers understood this stage intuitively when they wrote about half-dreams and threshold visions. Aristotle described moments when sleepers believed they were awake while clearly dreaming. And while he didn't have EEG machines, he wasn't entirely wrong. You're in a neurological border zone, and borders are always messy. As you sink further, you slide into N2 sleep, the longest stage of the night.
You can't hide.
This is where the brain really gets selective. Electrical bursts called sleep spindles appear, brief flurries of activity thought to help block out unnecessary noise. A well-established scientific fact is that these spindles correlate with how well you stay asleep despite environmental sounds. More spindles, fewer awakenings. Your brain is literally generating its own noise to drown out the world. I mean, white noise, but make it neural. And yet, even here, signals still sneak through. There's a quirky tidbit from sleep research that feels almost magical. If you play meaningful words to sleeping subjects, like their own name, the brain responds differently than it does to random sounds. Even in N2 sleep, brain activity changes, as if a tiny internal voice is saying, "Hey, that might matter." You don't wake up. You don't remember it. But something registers. Somewhere, a note is scribbled in the margins. This selective listening explains a lot about the strange experiences people report. You can sleep through loud, repetitive noise, but wake instantly to a subtle change. A door opening, a phone vibrating, a familiar footstep. Your sleeping brain isn't measuring volume. It's measuring relevance. Evolution taught it well. A snapped twig might mean danger. A constant waterfall? Background ambience. Very soothing, actually. As your breathing deepens, your thoughts become less linear. Logic loosens its tie and kicks off its shoes. You might catch fragments, an image of a hallway, a memory that doesn't belong to today, a sentence that starts strong and then dissolves into fog. This isn't dreaming yet, not fully. It's the brain testing its internal signal strength now that external ones are being turned down. A mainstream fact often surprises people here. Even in deeper non-REM sleep, the brain remains metabolically active. Energy consumption drops slightly, but certain regions, especially those involved in memory and emotion, stay busy. Eat sleep is less like powering off a computer and more like closing all the apps you don't need while a few important processes run updates in the background. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep, sleeping in two chunks with a wakeful period in between, was once the norm for humans. Old diaries and literature reference a first sleep and second sleep, with a calm, reflective period in the middle of the night. If that's true, it suggests our brains have always been comfortable hovering between awareness and rest, dipping in and out as needed. The idea that sleep must be one long, uninterrupted blackout might be a modern invention, possibly brought to you by alarm clocks and work schedules. Your body temperature drops slightly now, muscles relax more fully. The signal from your body to your brain says, okay, we're safe enough. And the brain responds by loosening its grip on the outside world just a bit more, but not completely, never completely. Here's a small, strange detail from sleep labs. Researchers have observed that sleepers can synchronize brain waves with rhythmic external sounds, like a softly repeating tone, without waking up. The brain hears the rhythm and gently aligns with it, like tapping a foot while pretending not to listen to music. You're not conscious of it. You're not participating on purpose, but the signal still shapes the state you're in. This is where the idea of receiving signals while asleep becomes less sci-fi and more quietly practical. Your brain isn't decoding language or making decisions the way it does when you're awake, but it is monitoring patterns, changes, and emotional significance. And it's listening for anything that breaks the expected flow. Sleep researchers still debate how deep this processing goes. Historians still argue whether humans once relied on lighter sleep to survive communal dangers. But what's clear is that sleep stages aren't walls, they're filters. And those filters adjust constantly. You might feel now as though you're sinking through layers, each one softer than the last. The outside world grows distant, but not gone. Like being underwater, you can still hear muffled echoes from above. Your brain knows where you are. It knows what matters. It knows what can wait. And so you drift, suspended in this stage where awareness flickers but doesn't vanish, where signals arrive and are gently weighed, accepted, or dismissed. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to react. Your brain is handling that for you now, efficiently, quietly, with millions of years of practice. All you need to do is keep drifting. You're deeper now, far enough that time feels soft around the edges. Minutes don't stack neatly anymore. They blur and bend. Somewhere along the way, the last clear thread of waking thought has loosened, and in its place, something more fluid begins to take over. This is the territory where REM sleep waits, not rushing in, not announcing itself, just gradually tinting your inner world with color and motion. Before REM fully arrives, there's a subtle shift. Your brain activity begins to resemble wakefulness again, at least on a monitor. That's a mainstream scientific fact that still feels counterintuitive. During REM sleep, the brain looks awake even though you are anything but. Neurons fire rapidly. Regions involved in emotion and imagery light up, and the rational, critical parts of the mind politely step aside. It's like hosting a party where logic was invited but decided to stay home. And this is where signals get creative. In REM sleep, your brain is no longer just filtering the outside world. It's remixing it. Sounds, sensations, even faint smells can slip into dreams. Not as themselves, but as symbols. A dripping faucet might become rain in a dream. A distant siren might turn into a wailing violin or an approaching spaceship. depending on how dramatic your sleeping brain feels like being. You don't hear the sound and think, that's a siren. You experience a story where the siren belongs. Historians still argue whether ancient dream interpreters were accidentally onto something real when they claimed external events shaped dream content. While they may have taken a few creative liberties, no, your dream about bread probably doesn't mean your cousin will betray you. The core idea wasn't wrong. Dreams are porous. The boundary between inside and outside becomes thin, almost playful. There's a quirky tidbit from modern sleep studies that feels especially relevant here. Researchers have found that playing specific sounds during REM can influence dream themes without waking the sleeper. Gentle water sounds increase dreams involving rivers or oceans. Soft speech can alter emotional tone. The sleeper never remembers hearing anything, but the dream remembers. It's like leaving notes on the fridge of the unconscious mind. Your body, and meanwhile, is doing something equally strange. During REM, most of your muscles are effectively switched off, a state called atonia. This is a well-established fact and a very important safety feature. Without it, you'd act out your dreams, running, fighting, dancing, dramatically tripping over imaginary furniture. The brain keeps the body still while the mind goes wandering. A sensible arrangement, really. And yet, signals still pass through. Your eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids, scanning dream landscapes no one else can see. Your heart rate fluctuates. Your breathing changes in response to dream events. If something intense happens in the dream, your body reacts as if it were real. The signal flows from imagination to physiology without needing your permission. Historians still argue whether early humans interpreted dreams as messages precisely because they felt real in the body. A dream that makes your heart race or your palms sweat doesn't feel imaginary, especially without neuroscience to explain it. Even now, waking from a vivid dream can leave emotional residue that lingers all day. Your brain receives something meaningful, even if it came from itself. But external signals don't stop knocking. They just get woven in more subtly. A classic example comes from sleep labs, where subjects are exposed to gentle stimuli during REM. A puff of air on the skin might become wind in a dream. A light touch could turn into a tap on the shoulder from a dream character. The brain doesn't reject the signal, it adopts it. This is one reason dreams feel so immersive. They're not sealed-off fantasies. They're collaborative creations between brain, body, and environment. There's an ongoing scholarly debate here. Some scientists argue that REM dreams primarily serve emotional regulation, helping the brain process feelings in a safe simulation. Others suggest they're a side effect of memory consolidation and neural housekeeping. Historians still argue whether dreaming evolved for a specific purpose or is simply what happens when a highly complex brain rests in a particular way. The truth, inconveniently, might be all of the above. You might notice, if you're still hovering on the edge of awareness, that dreams don't always make narrative sense. Scenes jump, characters change, physics resigns in protest. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. The brain regions responsible for logical sequencing are quieter now. What remains is association, when emotion and imagery. Signals connect based on feeling rather than fact. And sometimes, just sometimes, awareness flickers back on. This is where lucid dreaming enters the conversation. A quirky but well-documented phenomenon, lucid dreams occur when sleepers realize they're dreaming while still in REM sleep. Brain scans show increased activity in areas linked to self-awareness. The signal of "I am here" sneaks back into the dream state. You don't fully wake. You just notice. Lucid dreamers can sometimes respond to external cues, like light flashes or sounds, incorporating them deliberately into dreams or using them as triggers for awareness. It's one of the clearest demonstrations that even in deep dreaming, the brain is still listening, still capable of two-way communication under the right conditions. Not everyone can do this, and no, trying too hard usually just wakes you up. The brain prefers subtlety. Historians still argue whether ancient practices like dream incubation, sleeping in specific places to receive visions, were early attempts to harness this responsiveness. While temples probably didn't have EEG machines, they did understand something important. Context matters. The sleeping brain responds to its environment, even when the sleeper believes themselves completely gone. As your dream state deepens, emotional signals take center stage. Fear, joy, curiosity, nostalgia, they're amplified here. A small stimulus can trigger a big reaction. That's why nightmares can erupt seemingly out of nowhere. A sound, a bodily discomfort, a stray memory fragment can cascade into a full-blown threat simulation. And yes, there's a mainstream evolutionary theory that nightmares function as rehearsal for danger. Historians still argue whether this explanation overreaches, but it fits neatly with what we know. The sleeping brain is constantly asking, is this important? Is this dangerous? Even at rest, it's practicing survival. You don't feel that analysis happening. You just experience the story. As REM cycles ebb and flow through the night, signals continue to arrive and be transformed. Some are dismissed, some are woven into dreams. A few might be strong enough to pull you closer to waking. Most simply pass through, leaving faint impressions that dissolve by morning. And through it all, you remain still, breathing steadily, muscles relaxed, mind active in ways you'll never fully remember. The outside world hasn't disappeared. It's just been translated into a different language, one spoken in images, emotions, and fleeting moments of awareness. You drift on deeper into this listening sleep, where the brain doesn't shut its doors but closes the curtains halfway, letting just enough light through to know the world is still there. You don't notice the transition, but something subtle has changed. The vivid colors of dreaming dim for a while, replaced by something quieter, heavier, more grounded. This is the stretch of the night where your brain turns inward, away from storytelling and toward housekeeping. If a REM sleep is a surreal art film, this part is a meticulous editor working through raw footage at 2 a.m., sipping coffee and muttering, "Wait, we don't need all of this." A mainstream scientific fact is that during deeper non-REM sleep, especially what's often called slow-wave sleep, your brain begins replaying the day, not metaphorically, literally. Patterns of neural activity that occurred while you were awake fire again, sometimes faster, sometimes compressed, like a highlight reel on fast forward. If you learned something new, practiced a skill, or even just had a conversation that stuck emotionally, your brain is running it back now. You're not watching this replay. You're not judging it. Consciousness isn't invited, but the signals are there, pulsing quietly through networks that care deeply about what stays and what fades. While historians still argue whether ancient people sensed this process intuitively when they spoke about sleeping on a problem, the phrase turns out to be remarkably accurate. Studies show that after a night of sleep, people often perform better on tasks that require insight, even if they never consciously thought about them. Your brain kept working while you were busy being unconscious. Overachiever behavior, honestly. As this replay happens, external signals don't completely disappear. They're just deprioritized. The thalamus tightens its grip, allowing only the most relevant inputs through. A loud, sudden noise might still break the surface. A familiar sound might slip through. Everything else becomes background static. Here's a quirky tidbit. In sleep labs, researchers have found that if you subtly reintroduce cues from learning, like a specific smell or sound associated with a task, during deep sleep, memory for that task can improve. The brain hears the cue and goes, "Oh, right, this again," and strengthens the relevant connections. You never notice. You never remember smelling anything, but your performance the next day says otherwise. Your sleeping brain is surprisingly suggestible, like a cat that pretends not to listen, but absolutely does. Your breathing is slow now, deep and regular. Heart rate drops. Blood pressure eases. From the outside, you look completely disconnected. Inside, it's more like a quiet factory floor running essential processes under low lighting. Hormones involved in growth and repair are released. Immune signals circulate. Cells get instructions. The body takes advantage of this state to fix small things before they become big things. A well-established fact is that deep sleep is critical for physical restoration. Miss too much of it, and the effects stack up. Fatigue, weakened immunity, fuzzy thinking. And yet, even here, the brain refuses to fully let go of the world. It listens just enough to stay safe. Historians still argue whether early humans slept more deeply in groups, trusting others to listen while they rested. There's some evidence from modern hunter-gatherer societies that sleep was staggered, with someone always awake. If true, it suggests your brain's selective listening evolved not just for individual survival, but for social coordination. Someone else might be on watch, but your brain still wants veto power just in case. As memories replay, they aren't copied exactly. They're edited. Emotional weight matters. Relevance matters. Random details fall away. This is why you might forget where you put your keys, but remember how a conversation made you feel. The brain prioritizes meaning over minutia. Practical? Maybe. Annoying? Definitely, especially when the keys are still missing. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether sleep strengthens memories by replaying them or by weakening competing ones. Some researchers argue the brain is less about saving everything and more about clearing space. Historians still argue whether forgetting is a flaw or a feature. From an evolutionary standpoint, remembering every leaf you ever stepped on would be inefficient. You might shift slightly in your sleep now, a small movement as the body adjusts. Pressure changes send signals up from muscles and joints. The brain notes them, recalibrates, and settles you back down. No need to wake, just a quick systems check. Another quirky detail from sleep research. Even during deep sleep, your brain can respond differently to voices based on familiarity and emotional tone. A calm voice may be ignored. An angry one? Processed more seriously. It's not that you understand the words, it's that your brain recognizes patterns it has learned to care about. Tone travels farther than language. This is also when the brain does some of its most intense internal communication. Slow brain waves synchronize large regions, allowing distant areas to share information efficiently. Think of it as a nightly team meeting where everyone finally agrees on the agenda. The agenda, of course, is you. Historians still argue whether the invention of artificial light changed this process fundamentally. Before electric bulbs, nights were darker, longer, quieter. Deep sleep may have been deeper, more consistent. Now, with glowing screens and irregular schedules, the brain does its best under less than ideal conditions. It's adaptable, but it's not magic. Even a very dedicated factory needs maintenance windows. As the night progresses, this deep phase doesn't last forever. It comes in waves, strongest early on, then gradually giving way to lighter sleep and dreaming again. But what happens here matters disproportionately. This is where the foundation is poured. Miss it, and the rest of sleep feels flimsy. You don't feel productive right now. You feel like nothing. And that's exactly the point. Productivity in this case, Ash requires your absence. The brain needs you out of the room so it can rearrange the furniture without commentary. Signals continue to arrive from the outside world. Distant sounds, subtle shifts, but they're filtered through layers of prioritization. Most don't make it far. A few are noted and set aside. The brain trusts itself to wake you if needed. Until then, it keeps working. And you keep resting, suspended in this deep, listening quiet where memories are shaped, bodies are repaired, and the world is acknowledged but held at arm's length. You are not unreachable. You're just busy being rebuilt. The replay slows. The signals soften. And gradually, without announcement, your brain prepares to change modes again, carrying forward what it decided was worth keeping. You drift on, unaware of the careful decisions being made on your behalf. It's somewhere in the dark, your brain subtly shifts posture again, not waking, never that dramatic, but loosening its grip on the deep, slow rhythms that held you like a heavy blanket. Sleep isn't a straight descent, it's a tide. It pulls you under, then lifts you just enough to breathe, then carries you back down. This rise into lighter sleep is where the outside world gets another quiet chance to knock. You don't notice it consciously, but your brain becomes a little more curious here. The slow waves give way to gentler patterns. Muscles remain relaxed, but the sense of complete disconnection softens. This is often when sounds begin to register again, not sharply, not clearly, but with enough definition to be evaluated. A mainstream scientific fact is that the brain cycles through these stages multiple times each night, roughly every 90 minutes. Each cycle reshuffles the balance between deep sleep, lighter sleep, and REM. Early in the night, deep sleep dominates. Later on, REM takes the spotlight. Your brain follows this rhythm faithfully, even if your bedtime routine is, let's call it aspirational. As you drift through this lighter stage, the outside world can sometimes brush up against your inner one. A sound might briefly surface as a thought. A sensation might register as a vague discomfort before dissolving. You're not awake, but you're not sealed off either. This is why people can sometimes answer simple questions or mumble responses without remembering any of it later. The brain routes the signal, generates a response, and then promptly forgets to tell you. Historians still argue whether sleep talking was once interpreted as prophecy or possession. In medieval Europe, utterances made during sleep were sometimes taken very seriously, which feels unfair considering most sleep talk amounts to things like, "No, not the cheese," or deeply confident nonsense. But the phenomenon itself reveals something important. The boundary between receiving a signal and responding to it is thinner than we like to think. A quirky tidbit from modern studies. People can sometimes perform simple tasks while asleep, like pressing a button in response to a tone without waking up. Brain imaging suggests that while higher reasoning stays offline, basic sensory motor loops can still operate. It's like leaving the lights off in the house but allowing the hallway nightlight to stay on. Your brain is constantly asking one question. Does this require full consciousness? Most of the time, the answer is no. A distant noise? Logged and ignored. A pressure point in your shoulder? Adjust posture? Carry on. A familiar voice calling your name? Now that might escalate. Historians still argue whether this selective responsiveness shapes social sleeping arrangements. Sleeping near others, family, partners, community members, means the brain learns their signals intimately. A partner's breathing pattern becomes background noise. A sudden change in that pattern? Noted. The sleeping brain becomes finely tuned to its social environment, even when the owner of that brain is blissfully unaware. As lighter sleep blends toward dreaming again, the mind starts to reintroduce imagery. It's not full cinematic dreams yet, more like sketches in the margins. Faces without names, places without geography. These images can be sparked internally or nudged by external cues. A sound outside might influence the mood of the imagery without forming a clear object. Your brain is impressionistic now, more Monet than photojournalism. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether these lighter stages serve as transition buffers or have functions of their own. Some researchers believe they're essential for integrating information across sleep stages. Others argue they're simply the brain's way of not slamming the door too hard between consciousness and unconsciousness. Historians still argue whether humans have always slept this way, or if modern interruptions have stretched these lighter phases longer than nature intended. Your body takes advantage of this phase to check in. Signals from organs, muscles, and joints are reviewed. Hunger hormones shift. Stress hormones are kept low unless something truly demands attention. The brain ensures you don't sleep through something critical, like your bladder reaching a firm opinion on the situation. This is also where false awakenings sometimes begin. You might wake up in a dream, convinced you're in your room, going through familiar motions. The brain generates the signals of waking without actually waking. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon inspired early beliefs in astral travel or soul wandering. From the inside, it feels real enough to spark existential questions. From the outside, it's just another example of how convincing the sleeping brain can be. You shift again, perhaps rolling slightly, or guided by subtle discomfort signals that never quite reach awareness. The mattress creaks. The room remains unchanged. Your brain decides everything is acceptable and lets you sink again. Throughout all of this, signals continue to arrive, be evaluated, and be either dismissed or quietly acted upon. There is no central command issuing speeches. It's a decentralized system, elegant in its efficiency. Millions of neurons each make small decisions, and together they maintain this fragile balance between rest and readiness. Historians still argue whether modern humans underestimate how active sleep truly is. We talk about doing nothing while asleep, as if that were a failure. In reality, this is one of the most complex states the brain ever enters. It's multitasking without supervision, running processes you couldn't consciously manage if you tried. As the cycle continues, the lighter sleep fades again, making room for the next deep dip or dream surge. You don't track these transitions. You don't need to. The brain handles the timing, the filtering, the prioritization. The world remains out there, quietly broadcasting. You remain in here, quietly listening just enough to stay safe. And between those two spaces, your sleeping brain keeps negotiating, moment by moment, signal by signal, as the night carries you forward. You're carried forward on another slow wave of the night, barely aware that a new cycle has begun. If sleep had a personality, this part would be quietly vigilant, not anxious, not alert, just attentive in a low-effort way. Your brain isn't scanning for everything anymore. It's listening for meaning. This is where familiar sounds start to matter more than loud ones. A mainstream scientific fact is that the sleeping brain prioritizes emotionally relevant signals over sheer intensity. Volume alone doesn't decide what wakes you. Significance does. That's why a sudden crash in a movie might not stir you, but the soft click of your phone unlocking across the room can pull you right to the surface. Your brain has learned which sounds belong to your life and which ones can be safely ignored. During this stage, sensory processing becomes highly biased. The auditory cortex still responds to sound, but the response is filtered through layers of memory and expectation. If the sound matches a known pattern, your name, a baby's cry, a partner calling, it gets fast-tracked. Everything else is treated like spam email at 3 a.m., automatically archived. Historians still argue whether this kind of selective hearing influenced how humans slept in groups. In communal sleeping environments, recognizing specific voices would have been essential. You wouldn't want to wake for every cough, but you'd absolutely want to wake if the wrong person whispered your name. The sleeping brain, it turns out, is excellent at social discrimination. There's a quirky tidbit from sleep research that illustrates this beautifully. Studies have shown that even in sleep, people's brains respond differently to voices speaking their native language versus an unfamiliar one. You don't understand the words. You don't even consciously hear them. But the brain flags familiarity and processes it differently. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny internal voice says, "This is ours." Your body remains relaxed, heavy, cooperative. A muscle tone is low. Movements are minimal. But internally, there's constant micro-adjustment. Breathing subtly adapts to air quality. Heart rate shifts in response to dream emotion or external sound. The autonomic nervous system keeps you balanced without asking for input. This is also where alarms enter the story. A well-known but endlessly frustrating fact is that repeated alarms often become less effective over time. Your brain learns the pattern and downgrades its importance. That first jarring ring, urgent. By week 3, annoying but negotiable. The sleeping brain decides it's not a true emergency and files it under "can be ignored." This isn't laziness. It's pattern recognition, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Historians still argue whether humans ever needed alarms at all before structured schedules took over. Then, without artificial clocks, waking likely depended on light, temperature, routine, and social cues. The brain responded to environmental signals instead of synthetic ones. Modern life asks it to adapt, and it does, but sometimes with a little passive resistance. You might notice that in lighter sleep, dreams become more responsive. External sounds are more likely to shape them. A ringing sound might turn into a phone call in a dream. A voice might become a character speaking nonsense with absolute confidence. The brain takes the signal and wraps it in narrative clothing so it fits the current state. This blending explains why people sometimes believe they heard someone call them when no one did. The signal was ambiguous, the brain filled in the rest. When you're half asleep, the line between perception and interpretation gets very thin. Historians still argue whether ghost stories and nighttime visitations owe some of their power to this exact state. When the brain is suggestible, meaning rushes in to fill the gaps. Another quirky detail, your sense of pain is dramatically altered during sleep. Pain signals still travel from the body, but the brain's response is dampened. Minor discomforts are ignored. Larger ones might be woven into dreams or trigger repositioning. This selective muting allows rest to continue unless something truly demands attention. From a design perspective, it's elegant. From the perspective of sleeping through an awkward pillow situation, less so. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how much learning can occur during this state. While complex information doesn't stick, simple associations can form. The brain can link a sound with an emotional tone or a general category. It's not absorbing facts, it's absorbing context, mood, pattern, relevance. Historians still argue whether this explains why music heard during sleep can feel oddly familiar the next day, even when you don't remember hearing it. The signal left a trace, not a memory you can access, but a bias, a nudge. The brain remembered how it felt, not what it was. Your breathing deepens again as the cycle tilts back toward heavier rest. But before it does, there's a brief moment where responsiveness peaks. This is when people are most likely to wake naturally. The brain checks conditions, darkness, quiet, safety. If everything lines up, it lets you sink again. If not, it may bring you up to the surface. You don't experience this check-in consciously. It happens beneath awareness. So like a background app making sure your location services are still on. The brain is remarkably self-sufficient when left alone. Historians still argue whether modern interruptions, notifications, artificial light, irregular noise, have trained the brain to perform these check-ins more frequently. More disturbances mean more evaluations. More evaluations mean lighter sleep. The system adapts, but adaptation has cost. You turn slightly, perhaps hugging a pillow or shifting a leg. The movement is guided by signals you never feel fully form. The brain notices pressure imbalance, sends a command, resolves it, and returns to quiet. No dreams are interrupted, no awareness required. Throughout all of this, the outside world continues broadcasting. Wind moves through trees, buildings settle, someone far away laughs. These signals reach you, to touch the edges of your nervous system and are gently redirected or dismissed. The brain is not ignoring the world, it's curating it. Historians still argue whether the phrase, sleeping like a rock, has ever truly applied to humans. Rocks don't listen. You do, even now, even here. As the night continues, this pattern repeats. Descend, filter, respond, release. The brain never fully clocks out. It just changes priorities. Survival stays online. Everything else waits. And you, wrapped in this quiet vigilance, continue drifting. Not disconnected, just selectively tuned, like a radio turned low enough that only the most important stations come through. The signal fades again, the tide pulls you under, and your brain, faithful and tireless, keeps listening in the dark. The night stretches on, and you barely register that another cycle has quietly opened its doors. Your body remains still, cooperative, heavy in that way that only sleep can manage. But your brain is experimenting now, testing boundaries, seeing what it can absorb without letting you know it's paying attention at all. This is where the idea of learning during sleep enters the room, tiptoes around, and tries not to wake anyone. A mainstream scientific fact is that while you can't learn complex information, like a new language or advanced math, while asleep, your brain can still pick up on patterns. Not facts, not explanations, patterns, repetition, emotional tone. Researchers have shown that sleepers exposed to certain sounds paired with specific outcomes can later show evidence of having formed associations, even though they swear they heard nothing at all. Consciousness was never involved. The brain handled it quietly like a side project. Historians still argue whether early myths about knowledge arriving in dreams were exaggerated interpretations of this effect. While no one is waking up fluent in Latin, many cultures believe dreams could teach skills, reveal truths, or offer guidance. Strip away the mysticism, and what's left is a brain that continues organizing information even when the lights are off. You drift through a lighter phase again, the kind where dreams feel thin and flexible. This is prime territory for subtle influence. A repeated tone, a rhythm, even a consistent pattern of sound can gently shape neural expectations. The brain notices regularity. It always has. Regularity meant safety. Chaos meant danger. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to surprise people. In some experiments, sleepers exposed to specific smells paired with positive or negative stimuli later showed changes in behavior toward those smells while awake. The association formed during sleep. No memory of learning, just a quiet preference or version that appeared fully formed, like an opinion you didn't remember deciding on. Your brain is excellent at that, forming opinions without asking. This doesn't mean your mind is wide open to manipulation. Far from it. The sleeping brain is conservative, skeptical. It doesn't absorb meaning easily. It absorbs structure, tone, familiarity. You're not learning what something is. You're learning how it feels safe, neutral, important, ignore. Historians still argue whether this kind of processing played a role in how early humans adapted to environments. Repeated nighttime sounds, wind patterns, animal calls, water movement would have become emotionally categorized over time. Familiar noises faded into safety. Unfamiliar ones raised the internal volume. The brain learned the soundtrack of survival without conscious rehearsal. As you rest, your sensory systems remain partially online, especially hearing and smell. Vision takes a back seat. Closed eyelids are not very cooperative, but sound travels well in the dark, and smell bypasses many of the brain's usual filtering checkpoints. This is why scent is such a powerful sleep signal. Lavender, smoke, rain-soaked earth, they all carry emotional weight far beyond their chemical structure. A well-established fact is that the olfactory system connects directly to regions involved in emotion and memory. No detours, no thalamic gatekeeper asking for credentials. Smells walk right in. Even during sleep, they can influence mood, dream tone, and memory processing. Your brain might not tell you it noticed, but it noticed. You might dream now, lightly, not a full narrative, more like fragments drifting past, colors without edges, sensations without context. These are often shaped by whatever signals are sneaking through. A warm room might produce dreams of summer. A faint chill might conjure snow. The brain translates physical input into imagery automatically, like a bored illustrator filling space. Historians still argue whether people in colder or hotter climates dreamed differently before climate control became common. It's a hard thing to measure, but the principle holds. The body informs the mind, even in sleep. As the night deepens, your brain becomes less interested in novelty and more interested in reinforcement. Patterns encountered earlier, during the day or earlier in sleep, are strengthened. This is why repetition matters. A sound heard multiple times becomes less disruptive. A routine becomes soothing. The brain likes predictability. Predictability lets it rest more deeply. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how ethical it is to intentionally influence sleepers, even subtly. Techniques that play sounds or cues during sleep to enhance memory or behavior raise uncomfortable questions. Where does assistance end and intrusion begin? Historians still argue whether similar concerns existed when religious chants, communal prayers, or environmental rituals shaped group sleep. Influence during vulnerability has always made humans uneasy, for good reason. You turn slightly, guided by pressure signals you don't consciously feel. The movement is small, efficient, just enough to restore comfort. The brain registers success and returns to its other tasks. No dreams interrupted, no awareness summoned. This phase of the night often passes without drama, no jolts, no awakenings, just quiet absorption and reinforcement. It's easy to underestimate it because nothing flashy happens here. But this is where subtle biases form. Preferences settle. Emotional associations are nudged into place. Historians still argue whether this is why certain songs heard faintly during sleep feel nostalgic without context the next day. The emotion sticks. The memory doesn't. The brain kept the feeling and discarded the source. Like saving the mood but deleting the file name. Your breathing remains steady. The outside world continues broadcasting its low-level signals. Distant traffic, a clock ticking, air moving through vents. Each one reaches your nervous system and is assessed. Most are dismissed automatically. A few are tagged as familiar and allowed to fade peacefully. None demand action. The brain is not passive here. It's economical. It knows energy is limited. It chooses carefully what deserves attention. That choice is informed by millions of past nights, past dangers, past comforts. Every sleeper carries their own internal filter, tuned by history. Historians still argue whether modern noise pollution has overloaded this system. Constant low-level noise may force the brain to filter more aggressively. It's leaving less capacity for deep rest. The system adapts, but adaptation isn't free. Even the best filter wears down eventually. As this cycle begins to close, your brain eases away from responsiveness again. The window for subtle learning narrows. Signals are turned down further. Internal processes take precedence once more. Memory replay, emotional sorting, physical repair, all resume center stage. You don't feel any of this happening. You feel like nothing. And that's exactly how the brain wants it. The night keeps moving. Cycles overlap. Boundaries blur. Through it all, your sleeping brain remains quietly capable, listening without awareness, responding without memory, learning without instruction. You drift on, carried by systems older than language, older than stories, doing exactly what they were designed to do: keep you safe, keep you stable, and quietly shape who you'll be when you wake. You move into the later hours of the night now, where sleep grows lighter, more flexible, like a tide that no longer pulls quite so far from shore. Your body is still deeply relaxed, but your brain has begun preparing, slowly, subtly, for the possibility of waking. Not yet, just eventually. It's tidy like that. This is the part of the night where senses other than hearing start to matter more than you'd expect. A mainstream scientific fact is that while vision largely shuts down during sleep, other senses remain partially active, especially smell and touch. These systems never fully disengage, and in some ways they become more influential precisely because fewer competitors are online. With logic and sight taking a back seat, raw sensation gets more room to speak. Smell, eye in particular, has a kind of backstage pass. Unlike most sensory information, smell doesn't route through the thalamus in the usual way. It goes straight to areas tied to memory and emotion. That means even during sleep, sense can alter mood, influence dreams, and affect how deeply you rest. A faint, pleasant smell might make sleep feel smoother. An unpleasant one might increase microarousals without ever waking you fully. You don't think, "I smell something." You just feel slightly more tense or more calm. Historians still argue whether ancient sleeping spaces were intentionally scented for this reason. Incense, herbs, smoke from specific woods. Many cultures surrounded sleep with smell long before understanding neurons. Whether ritual or intuition, they were tapping into a real neurological shortcut. Touch works in a similarly quiet way. A pressure from a blanket, the firmness of a mattress, the contact of another person sleeping nearby, all of these send constant signals upward. The brain monitors them for changes. Consistency equals safety. Sudden shifts equal investigation. That's why a blanket slipping off can briefly tug you toward waking, while steady weight can deepen sleep. It's not comfort in an emotional sense. It's predictability in a sensory one. Here's a quirky tidbit from sleep research. Gentle, evenly distributed pressure, like a weighted blanket, can reduce nighttime movement and increase feelings of calm in some sleepers. The brain interprets that pressure as stability. Nothing is grabbing you. Nothing is changing. All is well. The signal says, "You're contained," and the nervous system listens. You might dream again now, but these dreams are different from the wild emotional stories of earlier REM. They're often calmer, more mundane. Rooms you recognize, conversations that almost make sense. These dreams are more likely to borrow directly from the environment around you. A sound becomes a radio in the dream. A shift in temperature becomes a change in weather. The brain is practicing continuity, easing closer to wakefulness without committing to it. Historians still argue whether these late-night dreams influence beliefs about prophetic or true dreams, since they're more likely to be remembered. When dreams occur closer to waking, they leave stronger traces. People remember them, talk about them, assign meaning. Earlier dreams vanish without witnesses. Your body, meanwhile, begins another quiet round of checks. When hormones that promote wakefulness start to rise very gradually, body temperature edges upward. Cortisol, the hormone everyone loves to blame, doesn't spike yet, but it stretches a little, like a cat preparing to stand. None of this wakes you. It just prepares the ground. Signals from the outside world become slightly more likely to register now. Not because they're louder, but because your brain's threshold for relevance has lowered. Morning birdsong, distant traffic, the hum of a building coming to life. These cues can begin nudging the brain toward awareness. This is why waking naturally often feels gentler than waking to an alarm. The brain recognizes the pattern. Dawn is coming. It has done this before. Historians still argue whether humans evolved to wake with light rather than sound. Before alarms, before schedules, sunrise was the most reliable signal there was. Even now, light filtering through closed eyelids affects brain activity, shifting sleep architecture subtly toward waking. You don't see the light. Your brain does. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how modern lighting disrupts this process. Artificial light at night delays sleep signals. Artificial darkness in the morning, blackout curtains, closed rooms, can delay waking cues. The brain adapts, but the rhythm becomes less anchored. Signals arrive out of order. The system improvises. You might stir slightly here. A small movement, a deeper breath. These are not awakenings. They're recalibrations. The brain is checking responsiveness, making sure the body is still comfortable enough to remain asleep. If everything passes inspection, it allows another short descent. In-pain perception remains dampened, but less so than earlier in the night. If something aches persistently, it's more likely to bubble up now. This is why people with chronic pain often report waking more in the early morning hours. The brain's filter is thinner. Signals get through more easily. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep patterns made this less disruptive in the past. If waking briefly in the night was normal, discomfort may have been addressed and sleep resumed without stress. Now, awakenings are often treated as failures, which adds anxiety to the signal stream. Anxiety, unhelpfully, is very good at waking brains. As dreams thin and stretch, you might experience moments where you're aware you're asleep but don't quite wake. Thoughts form, but they're slow and illogical. You might feel like you're thinking clearly while absolutely not doing that. This is the mind warming up its engine while still in park. External sounds are more likely to be interpreted accurately now. A voice sounds like a voice, not a dream character. A noise sounds like a noise, not symbolism. The brain's translation layer begins powering down. Direct perception inches closer. Historians still argue whether this is why some people feel most creative or insightful in the early morning. The brain is still flexible, still associative, but logic is coming back online. Signals from the world and from memory overlap in interesting ways. It's a brief window, easily missed if an alarm shatters it. Your breathing remains steady. Your muscles stay loose. You are not awake yet, but the night is no longer deep. It's thinning. Like fog at the edge of morning. Throughout all of this, the brain never stops evaluating signals. Smell, touch, sound, internal chemistry. Each contributes a vote. No single signal decides. It's a consensus process, slow and careful. Wakefulness will happen when enough conditions agree. Historians still argue whether modern life respects this process or bulldozes it. Sudden alarms, harsh lights, immediate demands. These override the brain's negotiation. Effective, yes. Gentle, not so much. For now, though, you're still here, floating in this lighter, receptive sleep where the world is close enough to feel, but far enough not to matter yet. Signals brush past you, some noticed, most ignored, all quietly processed by a brain that knows exactly where you are in the night. You don't need to decide anything. You don't need to respond. And the systems are aligned. The transition will come when it's ready. Until then, you drift, balanced delicately between rest and return, while your brain listens softly, patiently, waiting for morning's first clear cue. You're close enough to the surface now that thoughts occasionally bob up, blink, and drift away again. Not quite awake, not fully asleep. This is the strange, slippery zone where signals start crossing wires, and the brain, usually so orderly, lets a little confusion sneak in through the side door. This is where sleep talking, sleep listening, and general nighttime nonsense tend to thrive. A mainstream scientific fact is that during lighter stages of non-REM sleep, especially as morning approaches, parts of the brain involved in language can briefly activate while others remain offline. That's how someone can answer a question. Will you say something grammatically impressive and then have absolutely no memory of it later? The language center woke up. The memory department did not. Communication happened. Documentation did not. You might hear someone speak and respond without ever forming a clear image of them. The signal comes in. The brain parses it just enough to generate output. Conscious awareness is politely excluded from the process. It's like customer service handled entirely by automation. Historians still argue whether sleep speech was once treated as a kind of truth-telling. In some cultures, words spoken during sleep were believed to bypass social filters, revealing hidden thoughts or divine messages, which is a lot of pressure to put on a half-asleep brain that might just be reacting to a dream about sandwiches. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sleep talk often follows the emotional tone of dreams rather than their content. A person might sound angry, amused, or distressed without saying anything meaningful. The emotion leaks through. The narrative stays locked inside. It's another reminder that emotion travels more easily than logic when the brain is resting. As you hover in this state, your brain becomes more vulnerable to mislabeling signals. Internal sensations can be mistaken for external ones. External sounds can feel oddly internal. This is why people sometimes believe they heard someone call their name when no one did. The auditory system detected something ambiguous. The brain, eager to make sense of it, filled in the most socially relevant option. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon contributed to folklore about spirits, whispers, and nighttime visitations. When the brain is half awake, it's primed for meaning but short on verification. The result can feel deeply real, even when nothing is actually there. Your body remains mostly still, but small movements are more common now. Fingers twitch, toes flex. These aren't dreams spilling out. They're the motor system gradually regaining access as muscle inhibition eases. The brain is testing pathways, making sure everything still works. A gentle systems check before full reboot. Another mainstream fact. This is the stage where sleep paralysis can briefly overlap with awareness if timing gets messy. Consciousness wakes up before the body does. The brain receives signals, pressure, sound, imagined presence, but can't yet move or speak. It's rare, temporary, and deeply unsettling for those who experience it. Historians still argue whether accounts of nighttime demons or shadowy figures pressing on the chest originated from this exact mismatch. The experience feels external, threatening, intentional. In reality, it's the brain interpreting its own immobilization through a fear-tinted lens. Signals arrive without context. The mind supplies a story. You, fortunately, drift past this edge without snagging on it. External sounds are clearer now. A voice sounds like a voice. A door sounds like a door. The brain's metaphor generator is powering down. Translation becomes more literal. If someone speaks nearby, your brain may briefly register the words without assembling them into meaning. It's like hearing a sentence in a language you almost know. This is also where the brain becomes more honest about discomfort. An awkward neck angle, a blanket too warm, a limb that's gone suspiciously numb. These signals have been waiting patiently in line, and now the gatekeeper is letting them through. You shift, stretch, resettle. The discomfort dissolves and the brain takes note. Problem solved. Historians still argue whether earlier bed designs, harder surfaces, shared sleeping spaces, led to more frequent repositioning and lighter sleep. Modern mattresses encourage stillness, which can be comfortable, but also reduces the brain's opportunities to check in with the body. Again, adaptation works, but trade-offs remain. Dreams in this phase often involve routine actions. Getting dressed, checking a phone, having a conversation that almost makes sense. These are the brain's practice runs for waking life. The neural circuits that handle daily behavior warm up before being asked to perform for real. Here's another quirky detail. False awakenings are especially common here. You dream that you've woken up, maybe even started your day, only to realize later, sometimes much later, that you were still asleep. The brain generates the feeling of wakefulness without completing the transition. It's a convincing illusion. Many people don't question it until something feels off, like trying to turn on a light that won't work or reading text that keeps changing. Historians still argue whether repeated false awakenings contributed to philosophical questions about reality and perception. When the brain can simulate waking so accurately, it doesn't take much imagination to wonder what else might be simulated. Throughout this phase, where signals are coming from everywhere at once, Internal chemistry shifting, muscles reactivating, external sounds growing more frequent, light creeping in. The brain integrates all of it, slowly raising the volume on consciousness while keeping the option to sink back down if conditions allow. This is why early morning awakenings can feel fragile. You wake, but not firmly. A single thought, I should get up, can tip you into full alertness. Or, if you stay still and let signals fade, you might slip back into sleep with surprising ease. The brain hasn't committed yet. It's still negotiating. Historians still argue whether humans are meant to wake gradually or abruptly. Biological systems suggest gradual. Cultural systems often demand abrupt. The mismatch explains a lot of morning grumpiness. Your breathing deepens for a moment. Your chest rises a little higher. These are subtle markers of increasing alertness. Oxygen intake adjusts. Carbon dioxide levels shift. The body prepares for movement even if movement doesn't happen yet. Signals from memory begin to surface too. Obligations, names, plans. They arrive without urgency, like unopened mail on a table. The brain is reassembling the identity you'll need when you wake. For now, it keeps those thoughts fuzzy, just in case sleep continues. You're no longer deeply asleep, but you're not fully back either. This is the seam between worlds where the brain's remarkable flexibility is on full display. It can still ignore. It can still respond. It can still choose. And so you float here a little longer, in this thin, quiet space where signals overlap and clarity is optional. The night is almost finished with you, but it hasn't quite let go. Not yet. You drift again, just enough that the edges blur one more time. The brain, ever indecisive, decides it can afford a little more sleep after all. This is the zone where signals don't just arrive, they sometimes collide, where the mind briefly loses track of where the night ends and where waking begins. This is where false awakenings really stretch their legs. A mainstream scientific fact is that false awakenings occur most often during REM or very light non-REM sleep, when the brain's internal model of reality is active but sensory input from the real world is still muted. In other words, the brain is confident, it knows what awake feels like, and it's willing to fake it, convincingly, sometimes annoyingly so. You might dream you've woken up in your own bed, in your own room, doing very ordinary things. Checking the time, reaching for your phone, mentally planning the day. The realism comes from familiarity. The brain isn't inventing a fantasy world here. It's recycling a template it knows extremely well. Your morning routine, low effort, high believability. Historians still argue whether repeated false awakenings influenced early philosophical skepticism. Those uncomfortable questions about how you know you're really awake. When the brain can simulate reality with this level of detail, doubt isn't irrational, it's earned. Here's a quirky tidbit from sleep research. People who experience frequent false awakenings often report that something small gives it away. Text won't stay still when they try to read it. Light switches don't work properly. Gravity feels optional. When these glitches happen because the brain's simulation engine is running without full sensory feedback, it's impressive, but not perfect, like a video game running on low power mode. During these moments, signals from the outside world can still slip in, but they're often misassigned. A real sound becomes part of the dream. A real sensation becomes symbolic. The brain receives the signal, but files it under the simulated environment. Reality knocks. The dream answers. This blending can be unsettling, but it's also a sign of just how integrated perception normally is. When you're awake, the brain constantly cross-checks input from multiple senses to confirm what's real. During sleep, many of those checks are offline. The system trusts itself more than it should. Confidence without verification, a bold strategy. You might float briefly into awareness again, just enough to think, I should wake up now, before drifting back down. That thought doesn't belong to waking consciousness yet. It's more like a memo drafted, but not sent. A well-established fact is that the brain's default state is not silence. Even when you believe you're doing nothing, neural networks are active, maintaining your sense of self and continuity. During sleep, these networks don't vanish. They loosen. Identity becomes flexible. Time becomes optional. That's why false awakenings can feel so convincing. The brain knows who you are and where you usually wake up. It just hasn't checked whether this version is real. Historians still argue whether this flexibility once had survival value. Being able to simulate waking without fully waking might have allowed early humans to assess danger cheaply, running a mental check before committing energy. Or it might just be a side effect of a brain that evolved to predict reality rather than merely react to it. Either way, you're living with the result. Your body during all this remains mostly still. Muscle tone is low, breathing steady, heart rate calm. From the outside, you look deeply asleep. Inside, it's more like a dress rehearsal for consciousness. Another quirky detail, people often report feeling frustrated during false awakenings. They try to wake up and can't, or they think they've already woken up and resent having to do it again. That emotional response comes from the brain's executive systems flickering online without full control. You have intention, but not authority. It's like trying to steer a car while sitting in the back seat. External signals continue to arrive, especially sound. Your auditory system is one of the first to reassert itself. That's why voices or alarms often feature prominently in dreams during this phase. The brain hears something real and builds a reason for it. It doesn't like unexplained inputs. If there's a noise, there must be a story. Historians still argue whether this storytelling impulse explains why humans are so good at pattern making and so prone to superstition. When the brain lacks data, it fills gaps with meaning. During sleep, the data stream is thinner. Meaning rushes in. You might experience a moment of clarity here, a brief, sharp awareness that feels like waking. Eyes still closed, body still heavy, mind suddenly crisp. This is a micro-awakening, a normal, a healthy phenomenon where the brain checks in and decides whether to stay up or go back down. A mainstream fact is that people experience dozens of these micro-awakenings each night, most without ever remembering them. They last seconds, sometimes less. They're quality control checks. The brain asks, "Is everything okay?" If the answer is yes, it powers back down without bothering you. Historians still argue whether modern sleep trackers overemphasize these moments, turning normal brain behavior into a source of anxiety. Seeing every micro-awakening plotted on a graph can make sleep feel more fragile than it is. The brain isn't failing, it's doing routine maintenance. Your sense of time is completely unreliable now. You might feel like you've been awake for ages when it's been moments, or vice versa. And that's because the brain's timekeeping systems depend heavily on attention and memory, both of which are compromised right now. Without timestamps, experience floats. Dream imagery thins further. Scenes dissolve quickly. Thoughts don't stick around long enough to form narratives. This is the mind shedding its last illusions before either waking or sinking once more. Another small but telling fact. During this phase, your brain becomes more sensitive to expectation. If you believe it's time to wake up, even loosely, signals that support that belief are amplified. Light, sound, bodily sensations, all get nudged upward. If you believe you can sleep longer, the opposite happens. Expectation isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Historians still argue whether cultural attitudes towards sleep, valuing early rising or glorifying exhaustion, shape this expectation loop. The brain is plastic. It learns what mornings are supposed to feel like. Over time, that belief becomes a signal of its own. You might smile faintly at nothing or frown. Facial muscles sometimes react to dream fragments or emotional residues without any conscious story attached. It's like mood without narrative, the brain processing feelings before deciding whether they're worth keeping. Outside, the world is increasingly active. Distant movement, early voices, subtle vibrations through walls and floors. These signals reach you more clearly now. The filter is almost fully open. Almost. Historians still argue whether humans were ever meant to sleep through the entire dawn. In many traditional societies, early morning activity was normal. Sleep and wakefulness overlapped communally. Modern bedrooms isolate sleepers, delaying these cues. The brain adjusts, but again, trade-offs. You hover here in this strange pre-waking fog where reality is optional and effort feels unnecessary. The night has done most of its work. Systems are aligned. Identity is queued up, waiting to load. Soon something will tip the balance. Light, sound, intention, or nothing at all, just the slow accumulation of readiness. For now, you remain suspended in this final pocket of listening sleep, where signals are no longer whispers, but not yet commands. The brain has one hand on the switch, not quite ready to flip it, and you, wrapped in this last softness, float patiently, unaware of how close you are to becoming yourself again. And you don't wake yet. Instead, the brain takes a careful pause, as if hovering its finger just above the button. This is the moment where readiness and resistance coexist. Part of you is assembled, waiting. Another part is still perfectly happy floating here, wrapped in warmth and low effort, where nothing is required and everything is optional. This is where responsiveness sharpens, but selectively. A mainstream scientific fact is that as morning approaches, the brain's sensory thresholds continue to lower. Signals don't have to shout anymore. They can clear their throat politely and still be heard. But this doesn't mean every signal gets through. The brain remains choosy. It's not opening the floodgates. It's switching from night mode to preview. Sound is still the dominant sense here, but now meaning starts to matter less than change. A constant hum is ignored. A sudden shift, a pause, a new rhythm, an unexpected tone gets flagged. The brain is excellent at detecting deviations. Always has been. In nature, change meant something was happening, possibly something important. Historians still argue whether this sensitivity to change is why sudden silence can wake you faster than noise. When a constant background sound stops, the brain reacts. The pattern broke. Something changed. Better check. Your body responds to these evaluations with tiny adjustments, a deeper inhale, a slight shift of the jaw, a subtle tightening, then release of muscles. These aren't decisions. They're reflexive calibrations, preparing the system for potential movement without committing to it. There's a quirky tidbit from sleep research that fits here nicely. Even before you wake, your brain begins simulating the motor actions of waking. Neural circuits involved in sitting up, standing, and moving briefly activate in sequence, without sending commands to muscles. It's like a rehearsal that never reaches the stage. The brain runs the script just to be sure it still knows it. Historians still argue whether this pre-wake rehearsal evolved to reduce grogginess or injury. Standing up too fast from deep sleep could be risky. Running a dry simulation first? Sensible. Very on brand for the brain. Your internal chemistry is shifting more noticeably now. Wake-promoting neurotransmitters increase their activity. Sleep-promoting ones begin to retreat. This isn't a flip. It's a negotiation. A slow exchange of power where no one wants to make the first dramatic move. This is why waking can feel sticky. The systems are overlapping. One foot in sleep, one foot in waking, and the floor between them is slippery. Historians still argue whether this overlap explains why humans feel most vulnerable emotionally in the early morning. With sleep chemistry fading and stress chemistry not fully regulated yet, emotions can feel louder, closer to the surface. Signals from memory, unfinished tasks, worries, anticipations slip in more easily. The brain hasn't fully reinstalled its filters. Dreams here are often brief and fragmentary, less story, more sensation, a feeling of urgency without a cause, a thought without a conclusion. These aren't meant to be remembered. They're byproducts of systems coming back online at different speeds. You might experience a moment where you think you hear something, a voice, a sound, only to realize later it wasn't there. When this isn't imagination in the usual sense, it's prediction. The brain expects certain signals at certain times of day. When input is ambiguous, it guesses. Most of the time, those guesses are corrected instantly. Sometimes in this half-awake state, they linger just long enough to feel real. Historians still argue whether this predictive habit is the root of many supernatural beliefs. When the brain expects presence, it can briefly manufacture it, especially when verification systems are still booting up. Your sense of self becomes more defined now, not fully sharp, but recognizable. You remember where you are. You remember that you are you. That sounds trivial, but neurologically, it's a big deal. The networks responsible for identity and continuity are reasserting dominance. The night version of you begins to fade. Yes, another mainstream fact. The brain doesn't store being asleep as a memory. There's no record of nothingness. That's why sleep feels like a gap, no matter how active it was internally. As you approach waking, the memory systems are preparing to resume recording. Anything that happens after that point is more likely to stick. Historians still argue whether this is why early morning thoughts can feel disproportionately important. They're among the first things written down in the mental logbook of the day. Fresh ink always looks bold. Your breathing pattern changes again, slightly quicker, slightly more variable. This isn't anxiety, it's readiness. The body is shifting from maintenance mode to interaction mode. Oxygen delivery adjusts. Blood flow redistributes. Small things, but coordinated. The external signals are now arriving with minimal translation. A sound is a sound. A voice is a voice. The brain no longer feels the need to dress them up as dreams. Metaphor is dismissed. Literal meaning takes precedence. Historians still argue whether modern alarm tones are poorly designed for this state. Abrupt, artificial sounds ignore the brain's preference for gradual escalation. They force a jump instead of allowing a step. Effective? Yes. Pleasant? No. The resulting confusion and irritation are not personal failures. They're predictable outcomes. You might hover right at the edge here, eyes closed, fully aware of your body, aware of the room, but not moving. This is often mistaken for laziness. Neurologically, it's integration. The brain is aligning systems so that when movement happens, it happens smoothly. So another quirky detail, if you wake during this phase without an alarm, you're more likely to remember dreams, even fragmented ones. The memory systems are already active. Whatever was happening internally just before waking gets swept along into consciousness. Historians still argue whether dream journaling works best for this reason alone. Catch the mind while the bridge is still intact, and more comes with it. Outside, the world has fully committed to morning. Light is stronger now. Sounds are more frequent, more patterned. These cues accumulate. Each one adds weight to the decision. Stay asleep or wake. Your brain tallies them silently. Light, yes. Sound, yes. Internal chemistry, almost. Comfort, acceptable. Safety, confirmed. The balance is shifting. You don't feel a switch flip. You feel a gradual firming, a like focus coming into view. The fog thins. Sensations sharpen. The option to move becomes real instead of theoretical. Sleep has not failed you. It has completed its work. Signals were received. Signals were filtered. Signals were acted upon quietly and efficiently all night long. You are nearly back now. Not abruptly, not harshly, just ready. And as the final pieces click into place, your brain prepares to let go of listening in the dark and return to listening in the light, bringing with it everything it decided was worth keeping. You're balanced right at the threshold now, where sleep no longer pulls you downward and waking hasn't quite claimed you either. This is the moment where the brain does something very human. It hesitates, not out of confusion, but out of caution. Transitions matter. Rushing them has consequences. This is where signals begin arriving in full sentences instead of fragments. A mainstream scientific fact is that as wakefulness takes over, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking, comes back online. This is the system that reminds you who you are, what you care about, and, inconveniently, what you should probably be doing today. It doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in, bringing with it a sense of continuity that stitches yesterday to today. You might notice thoughts forming more clearly now. Not dreams, not images, actual thoughts. They still feel slow, a little soft around the edges, but they hold together. This is the mind reasserting narrative control after hours of symbolic shorthand. Historians still argue whether early humans experienced mornings differently when life was structured around daylight rather than schedules. Without clocks, waking may have been more negotiable. The brain could linger here, assessing conditions without urgency. Modern mornings tend to be less forgiving. The signal arrives and the response is expected immediately. Your sensory world sharpens. You can feel the weight of the blanket distinctly now, the texture of fabric, the position of your limbs. These sensations were always present, but they were background processes. Now they step forward, asking to be acknowledged. Another well-established fact is that proprioception, your sense of body position, fully re-engages as you wake. During sleep, the brain largely ignores these signals unless something changes. On waking, it checks everything. Are we aligned? Are we balanced? Are we ready to move? It's a quiet inventory, but a thorough one. You might stretch without planning to. That stretch isn't random. It's driven by feedback loops between muscles and brain, confirming range of motion and readiness. A gentle system reboot. If the brain had a loading screen, this would be the progress bar inching toward completion. Historians still argue whether stretching rituals in ancient cultures were intuitive responses to this neurological need. Before morning emails, there were morning movements, slow, deliberate, communal. The body and brain syncing up before the day demanded precision. Signals from memory arrive more insistently now. Names, tasks, loose ends. They don't come with emotion yet, not fully. They arrive as information packets waiting to be evaluated. Not the brain hasn't decided how to feel about them. That comes later, after caffeine or sunlight or the first minor inconvenience. This is also where mood begins to solidify. A mainstream fact is that mood on waking is strongly influenced by sleep stage at the moment of awakening. Wake from lighter sleep and the transition feels smoother. Wake from deep sleep and sleep inertia can cling like fog. It's not attitude. It's chemistry. The brain simply hasn't finished switching gears. Historians still argue whether modern alarm clocks are the primary villains here. By forcing awakenings at arbitrary points in sleep cycles, they interrupt the brain mid-process. The resulting grogginess isn't a failure of willpower. It's a systems issue. Your brain is now fully interpreting external signals accurately. A sound is not a symbol, and a voice is not a dream character. A noise has a clear source. The translation department has shut down. Reality no longer needs subtitles. There's a quirky tidbit from neuroscience that fits this moment perfectly. Even after waking, the brain continues to show sleep-like patterns for several minutes, sometimes longer. Certain regions lag behind others. This is why you can be awake and still make questionable decisions, like trying to put the kettle in the fridge. Some systems are online, others are still yawning. Historians still argue whether early mornings were once socially protected from decision-making for this reason. In some cultures, important discussions waited until later in the day. Whether intentional or intuitive, it respected the brain's slow return to full capacity. You might open your eyes now, or maybe you keep them closed a moment longer. Light hits the retina and sends a powerful signal straight to the brain's clock systems. This is not subtle. Light is one of the strongest wake cues there is. Even through closed eyelids, it announces itself confidently. It is daytime now. Your internal clock adjusts accordingly. Melatonin retreats. Cortisol rises more assertively. Energy mobilizes. None of this feels dramatic from the inside. It feels like clarity increasing by degrees. Historians still argue whether artificial lighting has confused this system beyond repair. Late-night light delays sleep signals. Early morning darkness delays waking ones. The brain adapts, but the rhythm becomes less anchored to the environment and more dependent on habit. Habit works until it doesn't. As you approach full wakefulness, once the brain stops prioritizing filtering and starts prioritizing response. Signals are no longer just received. They're acted upon deliberately. You decide to move. You decide to think. You decide slowly to begin. Another mainstream fact is that reaction time, attention, and emotional regulation all continue improving for up to an hour after waking. The idea that you should be immediately sharp is more cultural than biological. The brain prefers a warm-up period. It always has. Historians still argue whether the rise of early work schedules ignored this preference. Productivity gained in the morning may come at the cost of cognitive smoothness. The trade-off is rarely discussed, but widely experienced. You sit up or think about sitting up. The act itself is simple, but the coordination behind it is immense. Balanced systems engage. Yes, blood pressure adjusts. Muscles cooperate. The brain monitors for dizziness or instability and corrects in real time. You don't notice any of this unless something goes wrong, which thankfully it doesn't. Sleep has loosened its hold completely now. The listening brain of the night gives way to the interacting brain of the day. But the two are not separate entities. They are the same system, operating under different priorities. Historians still argue whether humans underestimate how much of the night brain remains active during the day. The filters you used while asleep, prioritizing relevance, emotional tone, familiarity, don't disappear when you wake. They continue shaping what you notice, what you ignore, and what feels important. As you fully wake, you carry forward the results of the night's work. Memory strengthened. When emotions softened or sharpened, associations nudge subtly in one direction or another. You don't feel these changes happening. You live them. Your brain receives signals all night long. It weighed them, sorted them, integrated them, and now it hands control back to you, not with a report, but with a feeling of readiness that didn't exist before sleep began. You are awake now, not abruptly, not perfectly, but sufficiently. The world is clear enough. Your body is cooperative. Your mind is assembled. And as the last traces of night fade, the brain shifts from quiet listening to active participation, carrying forward everything it learned while you weren't paying attention. You don't quite step into the day yet. Instead, there's a pause, soft, intentional, where the brain finishes its last checks and decides how gently to release you. Now, this moment matters more than we tend to admit. It's the hinge between worlds, where the listening brain finally loosens its grip and hands the microphone back to conscious thought. A mainstream scientific fact is that even after full awakening, the brain continues integrating information gathered during sleep. Memory consolidation doesn't end the moment you open your eyes. It tapers off. Emotional processing, in particular, can spill into the early morning, subtly influencing how you feel about things before you've even had time to form opinions. This is why some mornings feel inexplicably hopeful or inexplicably heavy. The night left a fingerprint. Historians still argue whether ancient cultures recognize this transitional vulnerability more clearly than we do. Many early societies built slow mornings into daily life. Prayers, quiet chores, shared silence. These weren't inefficiencies, they were buffers. The brain, it turns out, prefers not to be yanked between states like a stubborn lawnmower cord. You may notice now that your attention feels narrower than it will later. You can focus on one thing at a time, but not many. That's normal. Executive networks are awake, but not fully caffeinated, chemically or metaphorically. Expecting peak performance right now is like asking a cat to do calculus before breakfast. Possible? Theoretically. Wise? Absolutely not. Here's a quirky tidbit to smile at. Studies show that reaction time and decision-making improve noticeably after just a few minutes of quiet wakefulness, even without caffeine. Doing nothing for a moment, simply sitting, breathing, letting the brain finish booting, is genuinely productive. Congratulations. You're accomplishing something by not accomplishing anything. Historians still argue whether modern rise and grind culture misunderstood this phase entirely. From a neurological perspective, the grind can wait. The brain is still stretching. As signals from the outside world fully stabilize, your internal noise settles. Thoughts line up. Sensations feel grounded. The boundary between you and the environment becomes firm again. You are no longer listening from behind a curtain. You're present, available, here. And now gently, we slow everything down. Your breathing evens out, deeper and calmer than it was during the night. Each inhale feels unhurried. Each exhale releases whatever tension as sleep didn't quite finish dissolving. There is no rush. The day will wait its turn. Your muscles rest in neutral, no longer heavy, not yet active. Just ready, comfortable, supported. The surface beneath you feels stable, reliable, exactly where it should be. Nothing is required of you in this moment except to exist inside it. The brain, satisfied, eases out of its vigilance. It no longer needs to filter signals so carefully. The world is safe enough, familiar enough, predictable enough. The ancient systems that kept watch while you slept finally clock out, leaving behind a quiet sense of continuity. Historians still argue whether humans ever truly stop listening the way they do in sleep. Perhaps we don't. Perhaps we simply change what we listen for. At night, the brain listens for danger and meaning. By day, it listens for opportunity and connection. Same skill, different priorities. Thoughts soften now, lengthening, slowing. They don't need to resolve. They don't need to be followed. If one drifts by, you can let it pass, like a cloud that doesn't require weather analysis. Your mind knows how to rest. It practiced all night. There's nothing you've missed, nothing you need to catch up on. Signals were received, work was done, balance was restored as much as biology allows. Whatever today brings, you're entering it with a brain that has quietly prepared you in ways you'll never fully see, but will absolutely feel. So allow yourself to linger here, just a little longer, in this calm after sleep's long, careful listening. Let the noise stay distant. Let the clarity come when it's ready. You are steady, you are safe, and for now, you are wonderfully, deeply at ease. Even though the day has technically arrived, your mind knows something you don't always admit out loud. Waking is not a single event, it's a process. And sometimes the brain gets a little ahead of itself or a little behind. And that's when false awakenings and mixed signals slip back into the picture, like an encore you didn't ask for, but somehow still attend. You've been here before. You wake up, convinced the night is over. The room looks right. The bed feels right. Your thoughts even sound like morning thoughts. And yet, something is off. Maybe the light won't turn on. Maybe your phone screen won't behave. Maybe gravity feels like it's running an outdated operating system. The brain has declared you awake without fully checking the paperwork. A mainstream scientific fact is that false awakenings happen when wake-related brain networks activate before sensory verification systems are fully online. In other words, your brain's concept of waking appears before waking itself. Identity comes back first. Reality checks arrive late. It's a perfectly normal timing error, deeply confusing but harmless. Historians still argue whether this experience shaped early philosophical doubts about reality. When you can convincingly wake up inside a dream, it becomes very reasonable to ask uncomfortable questions like, how do I know this time is real? Spoiler alert, philosophers have been milking that question ever since. In a false awakening, internal signals masquerade as external ones. Memory supplies the room, expectation supplies the routine, emotion supplies urgency, and the brain fills in gaps with confidence. It's not lying, it's predicting. The brain's job is not to wait passively for reality, it's to guess what reality should be and then adjust if needed. Most of the time, that system works beautifully. Occasionally it gets creative. Here's a quirky tidbit. False awakenings are more common in people who remember dreams frequently and in those who experience fragmented sleep. The more often the brain practices crossing the sleep-wake boundary, the more chances it has to misstep. Think of it as mental jet lag. Lots of transitions, slightly confused passport control. You might notice that in these moments, emotions arrive faster than logic. Anxiety, urgency, mild annoyance. The feeling that you're late for something unspecified but extremely important. When that emotional signal comes from systems that are fully awake and very invested. Logical reasoning, on the other hand, is still tying its shoes. Historians still argue whether this emotional priority once served a survival function. If you woke and something felt wrong, that feeling alone might have been enough to trigger caution. Better to feel uneasy for no reason than calm in the face of danger. Evolution tends to side with paranoia, at least a little. Mixed signals don't stop at false awakenings. Even after you're clearly awake, remnants of sleep can bleed into perception. You might mishear a sound, misinterpret a shadow, feel briefly watched or oddly disoriented. These moments are not signs that your brain is broken. They're signs that different systems are finishing their startup routines at different speeds. A well-established fact is that sensory integration, the brain's ability to combine sight, sound, touch, and expectation into a single coherent picture, lags behind basic awareness after waking. You're conscious, but the orchestra hasn't fully tuned yet. A few wrong notes slip through. No big deal. Historians still argue whether stories of morning apparitions, household spirits, or the feeling of a presence originated from this transitional state. When perception is incomplete, the brain leans on pattern recognition. And pattern recognition, bless it, would rather invent a ghost than admit it doesn't know what's happening. Your brain hates uncertainty. You may also notice that internal bodily signals get misread during this time. A fast heartbeat feels like anxiety. A shallow breath feels like dread. A lingering dream emotion attaches itself to the first thought it finds, like a sticky note with no context. Ah, yes, the brain says. This feeling must be about something. And just like that, your mood acquires a backstory. Historians still argue whether early morning rituals were designed to prevent exactly this. Movement, light, washing, shared activity, these are grounding signals. They tell the brain very clearly, you are here, this is now, and this is your body. The more consistent the signal, the faster ambiguity fades. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether modern isolation worsens mixed signal experiences. Waking alone, in silence, with screens providing your first external input, gives the brain fewer reality anchors. It adapts, of course, but adaptation doesn't always feel pleasant. Sometimes it just feels weird. I need a light joke to keep us grounded. If your brain ever convinces you that you've already answered an email you definitely did not answer, congratulations. You've experienced a daytime cousin of false awakening. Same confidence, same lack of evidence, different consequences. Another mainstream fact. False awakenings often cluster. You can wake up multiple times in a row inside a dream, each layer convincing in its own way. This happens because the brain keeps reattempting the transition using the same flawed template, like restarting a computer and watching the same error message pop up again. Very authentic, very annoying. Historians still argue whether repeated false awakenings inspired myths about layered realities or dream worlds stacked inside one another. When lived experience does the same thing often enough, stories follow. As you fully ground yourself in waking, these mixed signals resolve. Vision sharpens. Sounds localize. Body awareness stabilizes. The brain receives enough consistent feedback to abandon prediction and commit to perception. Reality stops being a suggestion and becomes a fact again. You might not notice the exact moment this happens. Most people don't. It just feels like clarity returning, like fog lifting without announcement. The brain closes the file on sleep and opens a new one labeled Today, carrying over whatever emotional tone or insights it decided were relevant. Historians still argue whether the brain ever truly stops blending internal and external signals. Even fully awake, perception is always a collaboration between expectation and input. Sleep just makes that collaboration more obvious and occasionally more theatrical. By now, the night's mixed messages have settled. False awakenings dissolve into memory, if they're remembered at all. Signals line up, meaning stabilizes. You're back in the shared version of reality that agrees on things like gravity and functional light switches. The important thing is this: nothing went wrong. Your brain did not glitch. It did not malfunction. It explored the edges of its own transition space, where identity, perception, and awareness briefly overlap without clear borders. That space feels strange because it is strange. It's not meant to be lived in for long, just pass through. And now, you've passed through it. The listening brain of the night has fully stepped aside. The interpreting brain of the day takes over, armed with certainty, context, and a slightly exaggerated sense of responsibility. Signals arrive clearly now. Internal stays internal. External stays external. The labels stick. You are awake, properly this time. And even if later today you question whether you really locked the door or sent that message, well, that's just the waking brain doing its own version of mixed signals. Some traditions never truly disappear. The difference is this: now you know how much work your brain does to make reality feel solid. And you know that when it occasionally wobbles, it's not failing. It's transitioning. By now, the night feels like something that happened a long time ago, even though it was only hours or maybe minutes back. That sense of distance is deliberate. Your brain is very good at closing doors softly behind you, making sure you don't trip over the machinery that kept you safe while you slept. And yet, traces remain. A mainstream scientific fact is that sleep doesn't just restore energy, it subtly recalibrates perception. After sleep, the brain often becomes more sensitive to certain stimuli and less reactive to others. Emotional signals, in particular, are tuned overnight. That's why problems can feel smaller in the morning, or occasionally much bigger, depending on how the night's processing went. The brain adjusted the volume while you weren't listening. Historians still argue whether the phrase, "things will look better in the morning," emerged from wisdom or pure survival instinct. In many cases, it's neurologically accurate. The brain literally rewrites its emotional weighting during sleep, changing how incoming signals will be interpreted the next day. You might notice now that your senses feel sharper, but also more selective. You hear sounds clearly, but you don't attend to all of them. You see details, but only the ones that matter. This is the waking version of the same filtering system that operated all night, just repurposed. During sleep, it filtered for danger. During the day, it filters for relevance. There's a quirky tidbit worth lingering on. Studies show that after good sleep, the brain is better at distinguishing meaningful signals from noise. Not just auditory noise, cognitive noise, distractions, irrelevant thoughts, emotional static. Sleep didn't make you smarter overnight, but it made your attention more efficient. It gave your mind a slightly better spam filter. Historians still argue whether early humans experienced clearer perception after communal sleep, surrounded by familiar sounds and rhythms. Safety at night may have allowed deeper rest, which in turn sharpened daytime awareness. When the brain feels protected, it invests more in refinement than defense. As you move through the early part of the day, the listening brain doesn't vanish. It shifts roles. Instead of quietly monitoring for danger, it listens for opportunity, social cues, and patterns. Tone of voice, facial expressions, changes in routine. The same systems that recognized a baby's cry in the night now recognize subtle changes in someone's mood across the table. Sleep trained those systems. Waking uses them. Historians still argue whether humans underestimate how much of social intelligence is rooted in this signal sensitivity. We like to credit conscious reasoning, but much of what you pick up on happens before you can explain it. The brain notices first, you rationalize later. Costs another mainstream fact. The brain's predictive nature doesn't stop when you wake. It continues guessing what will happen next, adjusting predictions based on feedback. Sleep simply resets the prediction engine, clearing out outdated models. That's why habits can feel easier or harder after certain nights. The internal forecast changed. You might feel more patient today, or less, more creative, or more cautious. These shifts don't announce themselves. They feel like personality, but they're often physiology wearing a convincing disguise. Here's a light joke to keep us honest. If you wake up feeling like a brand new person and then immediately get annoyed by the same exact thing as yesterday, congratulations. You've discovered the limits of sleep-based enlightenment. Still, something did change. Your brain, after a full night of listening, it has refined its thresholds. It knows a little better what to ignore. It knows a little better what deserves attention. That knowledge shapes your day in quiet ways. You answer one message faster than another. You overlook a sound that would have irritated you last night. You notice a detail you would have missed. Historians still argue whether this is why sleep deprivation makes the world feel harsher. Without proper filtering, everything arrives at full volume. Signals blur together. Meaning gets lost in noise. The brain becomes reactive instead of selective. Rest restores discernment. As the day unfolds, the memory of sleep fades further. You don't remember the countless signals that arrived overnight, the sounds you ignored, the smells you processed, the micro adjustments your body made. But their effects remain embedded in how you move, think, and feel. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether humans should pay more attention to this continuity, whether recognizing sleep as an active state might change how we treat rest culturally. If sleep is not absence but participation, perhaps it deserves more respect. Historians still argue whether future societies will look back at chronic sleep deprivation the way we now look at other once normalized harms. Your brain doesn't need that debate to function. It will keep doing its job regardless. But understanding it changes how you relate to your own tiredness, your own foggy moments, your own sudden clarity. You're not lazy when you need sleep. You're not broken when signals feel overwhelming. You're operating a system designed to balance awareness and rest, connection and withdrawal, listening and acting. Throughout the day, echoes of the night appear in small ways. A song heard faintly while you slept feels oddly familiar. A smell triggers comfort without explanation. A decision feels easier than expected. These are not accidents. They're residues, subtle outcomes of the brain's nighttime negotiations. Historians still argue whether intuition is simply memory without attribution. If so, sleep is one of intuition's favorite workshops. As evening eventually approaches, far from now but inevitably, the cycle will prepare to repeat. Signals will soften again, filters will shift. The brain will begin another careful descent into listening sleep. Nothing about today's wakefulness is separate from that future rest. They're parts of the same rhythm. For now, though, you move through the day equipped with a brain that has quietly tuned itself in the dark. It listened when you couldn't. It learned without telling you. It kept watch without demanding credit. And when tonight comes, it will do it all again, receiving signals, weighing meaning, protecting you while you drift away. You don't have to remember any of this for it to work. You just have to sleep. As the day stretches on, something subtle begins to shift again, so gradual you barely notice it. Your brain, which felt crisp and alert earlier, starts quietly recalibrating. Not because anything is wrong, but because time has passed. Signals have piled up. Decisions have been made. Attention has been spent. And just like that, the system that woke you so carefully this morning begins planning its return to listening mode. And this is where the story bends back on itself. A mainstream scientific fact is that the brain's sensitivity to signals changes across the day, following circadian rhythms that affect alertness, reaction time, and emotional regulation. Midday often brings a dip, not a failure, not a flaw, just biology doing what it has always done. Energy wavers, focus softens. The brain briefly revisits a lighter version of the filtering state it uses during sleep. Historians still argue whether the idea of a midday rest, or siesta, was a cultural luxury or a neurological necessity. In warmer climates especially, people learn to work with the brain's rhythms instead of bulldozing through them. Modern schedules tend to ignore this dip, which explains a lot about afternoon coffee consumption and deeply unnecessary email replies. While you might notice that during these quieter moments of the day, your mind wanders more easily. Thoughts drift, attention slips. You stare at nothing and suddenly remember something from years ago. This isn't distraction. It's the brain loosening its grip, briefly returning to an internally focused state similar to light sleep. Here's a quirky tidbit. Brain imaging shows that during mind wandering, some of the same networks active during dreaming light up again. Not as intensely, but recognizably. Daydreaming is not far removed from dreaming. It's the listening brain peeking out while you're still awake. Historians still argue whether ancient storytelling traditions emerged from these liminal states, times when people were awake enough to speak but relaxed enough to let ideas connect freely. Creativity, like sleep, thrives when control eases slightly. As afternoon fades toward evening, your brain starts paying more attention to environmental cues again. Light angle changes, shadows lengthen, sounds soften or become more rhythmic. These signals don't command sleep yet, but they plant suggestions. The brain notices patterns repeating from countless previous days. Evening means winding down as possible soon. A well-established fact is that melatonin release is strongly influenced by light exposure, particularly blue light. As daylight fades, the brain expects darkness. When screens replace sunsets, the signal gets confusing. The brain adapts, but adaptation often comes with a delayed bedtime and a restless mind that insists it's not tired yet. Historians still argue whether pre-electric evenings were calmer by necessity or design. And without artificial stimulation, the brain's transition towards sleep likely began earlier and more gently. Firelight flickers don't shout, they whisper. The listening brain appreciates that. You may notice a familiar sensation now. Mental fatigue paired with physical restlessness. Your body wants to move. Your brain wants quiet. This mismatch is a classic pre-sleep signal, though it often gets ignored. Stretching, pacing, shifting posture. These actions help the body discharge excess energy so the brain can settle later. Another quirky detail, yawning increases as evening approaches, not because you're bored, but because your brain is regulating temperature and oxygen levels in preparation for rest. Yawning cools the brain slightly, a small but meaningful signal that it's time to slow down. Socially awkward, neurologically efficient, Historians still argue whether yawning became contagious as a social coordination signal. An early way of saying, we're all winding down now. Whether or not that's true, the effect is undeniable. One yawn travels fast, like a memo passed quietly around the room. As night approaches, your brain's filtering priorities begin shifting again. Emotional sensitivity often increases. Sounds feel louder. Lights feel harsher. This isn't weakness. It's the system changing modes. The brain is preparing to evaluate signals the way it does at night. Carefully, defensively, selectively. You might find yourself more reflective now. Conversations turn inward. Thoughts revisit unresolved moments from the day. This is the early stage of memory replay beginning to queue up. The brain flags experiences for later processing, tagging them with emotional markers like important, confusing, or ignore unless needed. Historians still argue whether evening reflection rituals, journaling, prayer, quiet conversation, helped align conscious thought with this natural tagging process. By acknowledging the day intentionally, people may have reduced the brain's need to replay it aggressively at night. Less mental noise, more rest. External signals soften too. The world grows quieter, or at least more predictable. Traffic patterns change. Voices drop. Even artificial lighting tends to become warmer in tone as lamps replace overhead glare. Each of these cues nudges the brain closer to listening mode. A mainstream fact is that routine plays a huge role here. Repeated evening behaviors, brushing teeth, changing clothes, dimming lights, become powerful signals themselves. See, the brain learns them as a sequence that reliably precedes sleep. Over time, these actions trigger physiological responses automatically. You don't decide to get sleepy. Your brain recognizes the pattern and does it for you. Historians still argue whether modern irregular schedules have weakened these learned signals. When evenings vary wildly, the brain has fewer anchors. It adapts, but the transition becomes bumpier. Listening mode engages later, sometimes reluctantly. You might feel a gentle pull now, a sense that effort requires more intention than it did earlier. That's the listening brain testing the waters, checking whether it can safely begin stepping forward again. Not yet, but soon. As night settles in fully, the cycle prepares to repeat. The same systems that filtered danger while you slept last night will soon filter distraction, noise, and thought. The same brain that listened for meaning in the dark will once again take over, quietly and without ceremony. You don't need to manage this transition perfectly. The brain is very forgiving. It has done this tens of thousands of times already. Tonight will be another variation on a familiar theme. Signals will arrive. Most will be dismissed. Some will be woven into dreams. A few will be noted carefully, stored away for later. And you will drift, unaware of the steady vigilance beneath the stillness. For now you remain awake, but softer than you were, calmer than you were, already leaning toward rest. The day's listening is winding down. The night's listening is getting ready to begin. And your brain, faithful as ever, is already adjusting the volume. The light has thinned now, stretched low and sideways, and your brain recognizes the pattern instantly, even if you don't consciously name it. Evening has crossed into night, not dramatically, not with a gong, just with a quiet agreement between biology and the sky that it's time to start letting go again. This is where the listening brain begins its second shift. A mainstream scientific fact is that as darkness settles, the brain increases production of melatonin, the hormone that signals biological night. Melatonin doesn't knock you out. It doesn't force sleep. It simply changes the rules, lowering alertness, softening focus, and making internal signals louder than external ones. The world doesn't disappear, it just stops insisting. Historians still argue whether humans once experienced night as a shared psychological state rather than an individual one. Before artificial light, darkness arrived for everyone at roughly the same time. Entire communities entered listening mode together. Now night is optional. Some people drift, others glare into glowing rectangles and dare biology to argue back. Biology, famously, keeps receipts. You may notice that sounds feel different now. Not quieter, just closer. A distant noise feels more present. A small sound carries more weight. This is the same prioritization system that operated while you slept last night, beginning to reassert itself. At night, the brain assumes uncertainty. It listens more carefully even before sleep begins. Here's a quirky tidbit that fits beautifully here. Studies show that the auditory cortex becomes more sensitive to unexpected sounds in low-light conditions, even when fully awake. The brain doesn't wait for sleep to turn up the volume. Darkness alone is enough to shift its listening strategy. Evolution never stopped updating the settings. Historians still argue whether this heightened nighttime sensitivity shaped human storytelling. Campfire tales, whispered warnings, shared myths, all delivered in the dark when every sound mattered more. A good story at night doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be well-timed. Your body responds too. Movements slow slightly. Gestures become more economical. You don't rush across rooms the way you might at noon. The brain is conserving energy even if you're still technically busy. Why, it's preparing for reduced sensory input by lowering output first. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether modern overstimulation at night, constant noise, notifications, bright light, forces the brain into a confusing hybrid state. Listening mode is activated, but sleep is delayed. The result is a mind that feels tired but restless, alert but unfocused. A car stuck between gears, revving gently and getting nowhere. You might recognize that feeling. As you move through your evening routine, each familiar action sends a signal. Changing clothes, washing your face, dimming lights, sitting down. These behaviors don't just reflect tiredness. They create it. The brain learns sequences. Once enough steps line up, it begins the descent automatically. Historians still argue whether ritual existed before language. Repeated actions may have been one of the earliest ways humans communicated safety to their own nervous systems. Same actions, same order, same outcome. The listening brain loves a reliable pattern. Your thoughts start to stretch now. They take longer to arrive. When they do, they wander. A memory from earlier resurfaces not because it's important, but because it's unfinished. The brain flags loose ends at night, preparing them for replay during sleep. A mainstream scientific fact is that emotionally charged or unresolved experiences are more likely to be reactivated during sleep. The brain doesn't care about chronology, it cares about tension. Anything with lingering emotional energy gets a ticket to the overnight processing queue. Historians still argue whether this is why nighttime rumination feels so intense. The day brain keeps problems busy. The night brain invites them to speak. Without distractions, signals echo more loudly. It's not cruelty, it's triage. You might feel more introspective now, more aware of your internal state. Hunger, fatigue, discomfort, signals that were easy to ignore earlier demand attention. The brain lowers its external filters and raises its internal ones. This is not weakness, it's recalibration. Here's another quirky detail. Body temperature begins dropping in the evening, and that drop itself promotes sleepiness. The brain interprets cooling as a signal that activity is ending. This is why a warm shower before bed can paradoxically help you sleep. The rapid cooling afterward amplifies the signal. Biology loves contrast. Historians still argue whether ancient bathing rituals before sleep served this exact purpose. A warmth followed by cooling, followed by rest. You don't need a neuroscience degree to notice when something works. As full night settles in, your brain begins reassigning attention away from future planning and toward present safety. Long-term goals lose urgency, tomorrow can wait. What matters now is whether this environment is secure enough to let go. This is where the listening brain overlaps with instinct. Every creak, every unfamiliar sound is briefly evaluated. Familiar ones are dismissed quickly. New ones linger a moment longer. This is the same selective vigilance that protected sleeping ancestors from predators and threats. Your modern brain uses it to decide whether a noise is a cat, a radiator, or something worth sitting up for. Historians still argue whether humans ever truly slept deeply in unfamiliar places. Even today, many people experience lighter sleep their first night somewhere new, a phenomenon sometimes called the first night effect. One hemisphere of the brain stays slightly more alert, listening harder than the other, a built-in night watch. You might notice your reactions slowing now, not dangerously, just noticeably. Words come a beat later. Decisions feel heavier. That's the brain reducing speed to reduce error. At night, accuracy beats efficiency. There's an open scholarly debate about whether society's expectation of nighttime productivity contradicts this fundamental shift. Humans can stay awake at night, yes, but the brain never fully treats night like day. It changes the rules whether you agree or not. As you settle further, the world narrows, not claustrophobically, comfortably. Fewer inputs, fewer demands. This narrowing is essential. When the brain cannot process everything all the time, night is when it chooses less on purpose. You might feel a gentle pull towards stillness now. Not sleep yet, just quiet. Sitting without scrolling, standing without urgency, letting moments pass without filling them. This is the listening brain clearing space. Historians still argue whether silence was once more common and more valued at night. Without engines, without constant hum, the dark was genuinely quiet. The brain evolved expecting that. When modern nights stay noisy, the listening brain works harder than it should, and yet it adapts. It always adapts. As bedtime approaches, your brain begins rehearsing the transition again. Filters ready, sensory thresholds adjust, muscles prepare to relax. Consciousness loosens its grip, not all at once, but respectfully. Sovereign like a host stepping back and letting a trusted caretaker take over. You don't feel this preparation as a checklist. You feel it as heaviness behind the eyes, as slower thoughts, as the sudden appeal of closing them just for a second. Signals are already being rerouted. External ones downgraded, internal ones prioritized. The listening brain is warming up, stretching its ancient muscles, ready to do what it does best. Soon you'll lie down. Soon the world will dim. Soon you'll cross that familiar boundary again. Not falling, not vanishing, just drifting. And when you do, the brain will listen. It always does. You finally lie down, and the day releases you with a soft, almost relieved sigh. Not yours, the brain's. It has been waiting for this posture, this angle, this permission slip written in gravity and fabric. Horizontal is not just comfortable, it's a signal, a very old one. The moment your body settles, the listening brain steps forward again, not loudly, not ceremoniously, just clearing its throat and taking over the shift. A mainstream scientific fact is that posture alone influences neural activity. Lying down reduces sympathetic nervous system activity and encourages parasympathetic dominance, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and repair. Translation: your brain takes one look at you, stretched out, and says, we're doing this now. Your muscles respond first, letting go in stages. Jaw, shoulders, hands, legs. Each release sends confirmation signals upward. Support is stable, no balancing required, threat level low. The brain loves redundancy. The more systems agree that you're safe, the faster the filters begin to close. Historians still argue whether early humans associated lying down with vulnerability long before beds existed. On open ground, lying flat meant trusting the environment, or the group, to keep watch. That trust is still embedded in your nervous system. It doesn't fully let go unless conditions feel right. You might notice sounds more clearly now, paradoxically. A ticking clock, a distant car, the soft hiss of air moving. This isn't because the world got louder. It's because your brain is scanning one last time before committing, a final perimeter check. Once nothing alarming appears, those same sounds will fade into near nothing. Here's a quirky tidbit. Researchers have found that the brain briefly increases sensory sampling right after lights go out. It's a last sweep, like checking the locks even though you're sure you already did. Could it be efficient? Debatable? Reassuring? Absolutely. You breathe out longer than before. That exhale is another signal. The brain interprets extended exhalation as calm intent. You're not bracing. You're not preparing to move. You're staying. That matters. Historians still argue whether controlled breathing practices evolved independently across cultures because people noticed, long before neuroscience, that breath could talk directly to the nervous system. Slow breathing doesn't just calm you, it convinces the brain that calm is justified. Your thoughts begin to lose their edges now. They still appear, but they're less insistent. A reminder from earlier floats up, looks around, and drifts off without complaint. The brain is already deprioritizing future planning. Night logic is different. Tomorrow is not an emergency. A well-established fact is that the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, self-control, and overthinking conversations from 3 years ago, reduces its activity as sleep onset approaches. This is why problems feel unsolvable at night and surprisingly manageable in the morning. The problem didn't change. The processor did. Light jokes deserve their place here, so let's allow one. If your brain insists on replaying every awkward thing you've ever said only when you're trying to sleep, congratulations. It is following ancient, time-honored tradition. As your eyelids grow heavier, the listening brain starts narrowing the channel. External signals are still received, but with less enthusiasm. Internal sensations, breath, heartbeat, warmth, move to the front of the line. This inward turn is deliberate. The brain needs a stable internal rhythm to sync against. Historians still argue whether early lullabies work not because of melody, but because of predictability. Repetition, gentle rhythm, familiar tone. These elements give the brain something boring and reliable to lock onto, and the listening brain adores boring reliability. Your awareness starts to feel less centralized. Thoughts don't line up behind one another anymore. They appear in loose clusters, an image here, a phrase there. This is not loss of control, it's redistribution. Conscious attention is stepping back, making room for background processes to expand. A mainstream scientific fact is that during sleep onset, brain waves slow from fast beta activity to alpha and then theta rhythms. Subjectively, this feels like drifting or floating or gently tipping sideways. While objectively, it's millions of neurons agreeing to stop shouting and start humming. You might experience a brief sense of falling, or a twitch, or a sudden image that feels oddly vivid. These hypnagogic moments are common and harmless. The brain is switching control systems, and sometimes the handoff is a little clumsy, like passing a glass of water and both people let go at once. Oops! Historians still argue whether ancient cultures interpreted these sensations as spiritual thresholds or soul travel. When something feels unfamiliar and intense, humans tend to add a narrative. Neuroscience offers a simpler explanation. But honestly, the mystery had better marketing. Your listening brain now begins its real work, deciding what not to listen to. Traffic noise becomes texture. A ticking clock becomes part of the room's heartbeat. Even your own thoughts lose their authority. The brain doesn't shut them off. It just stops forwarding them to the part of you that comments on everything. Here's another quirky tidbit. Studies show that familiar background sounds can actually help some people fall asleep faster than silence. Silence offers nothing to anchor to. Familiar noise gives the listening brain a steady reference point, something it can safely ignore, which is why a fan becomes a loyal companion instead of an appliance. Historians still argue whether humans evolved to sleep better with environmental sound, wind, insects, fire crackle, rather than absolute quiet. Total silence may feel unnatural to a brain shaped in noisy ecosystems. When it hears nothing, it sometimes assumes something is wrong. Your body temperature continues its gentle drop. This isn't random. On cooling signals the brain that activity is ending. Metabolism slows. Muscles soften further. The brain begins redirecting energy inward, away from movement and toward maintenance. You're not asleep yet, but you're no longer fully here either. This is the doorway state again, the one you've passed through so many times you rarely notice it. Awareness thins, sensation blurs, time becomes flexible. A minute can stretch or vanish entirely. The listening brain is now in charge of pacing. Historians still argue whether humans once spent more time in this in-between state, easing into sleep gradually without abrupt cutoffs. Firelight fades slowly. Conversations taper. Darkness thickens. Modern nights, with their sudden light switches and screens, compress this transition. The brain adapts, but it prefers a gentler slope. You might feel yourself doing that thing where you're almost asleep but not quite, where effort feels unnecessary and staying awake feels oddly difficult. This is the brain's leverage point. It has reduced the rewards of wakefulness and increased the comfort of letting go. A third light joke. Because balance matters. This is also the exact moment your brain might suddenly remember one extremely specific task you forgot to do today. Thank you, brain. Very helpful timing. But even that thought fades faster now. Signals continue arriving, sound, touch, internal sensation, but they're sorted quickly. None are escalated, none require action. The listening brain notes them and moves on, satisfied. Your breathing finds its own rhythm, slower and deeper than you intended. You didn't choose it. The body did. The brain approved. And now, almost without noticing, you cross the threshold. Not with a jolt, not with a blackout. Just a soft disengagement, like a conversation ending because neither person has anything urgent left to say. The listening brain remains, of course. It never leaves. But conscious awareness steps aside, trusting the ancient system to keep watch again. Signals will still come. The world will still exist. Your brain will still listen. You don't need to. That part is taken care of now. You are back inside the night now, though it doesn't feel like an arrival. It feels like sinking into something that was already waiting for you, patient and familiar. Awareness has thinned to a gentle haze, and the listening brain has taken full control again, quiet, methodical, deeply practiced at this work. This is where the cycle truly closes. A mainstream scientific fact is that once sleep is established, the brain resumes its pattern cycling through stages, just as it did the night before and the night before that. Nothing about tonight is entirely new. The order may vary, the timing may shift, but the architecture is ancient. Your brain knows the route even if you don't remember the journey. External signals still arrive, of course. They always do. Sound waves still reach your ears. Pressure still presses into skin and muscle. Temperature still fluctuates. But now those signals are treated differently. They're not evaluated for meaning first. They're evaluated for threat. If none is detected, they dissolve into background without ceremony. Historians still argue whether this constant low-level vigilance is why humans never sleep as deeply as we imagine. Even at your most unreachable, some part of your brain is standing watch. Not anxiously, not tensely, just responsibly, like someone dozing in a chair with one eye half open, confident they'll wake if needed. Your breathing has slowed enough now that each inhale feels expansive, each exhale unhurried. The rhythm is no longer something you could change easily even if you tried. Control has been delegated. The body and brain are in agreement, and agreement makes everything smoother. Here's a quirky tidbit that fits this moment. Research shows that the brain's sense of time becomes highly distorted during stable sleep. Minutes and hours are not tracked accurately, if at all. This is why sleep can feel instant or endless depending on when you wake. Without conscious timekeeping, experience collapses inward. Duration loses meaning. Historians still argue whether this timelessness influenced ancient ideas about the soul leaving the body during sleep. When experience has no clear beginning or end, it's tempting to imagine travel. In reality, the brain simply stopped taking attendance. As the first deeper stage settles in, your brain's electrical activity slows in large rolling waves. These waves synchronize vast regions, allowing information to move efficiently. This is not idleness. This is coordination. Systems that rarely speak directly during the day now exchange notes freely. Memory replay begins again, selective and compressed. Not everything gets invited. Only what carried weight. Only what left an impression. The brain doesn't care about your to-do list as much as it cares about unresolved emotion, novelty, or meaning. Practical details are negotiable. How feelings are not. Historians still argue whether emotional memory mattered more than factual memory for early survival. Remembering that a place felt dangerous may have been more useful than remembering exactly why. Your brain still prioritizes this way. Evolution rarely updates its core values. You may dream lightly here, though you won't know it. Images form and dissolve without story. Sensations flicker without explanation. These early dream fragments are often overwritten later in the night, replaced by richer narratives. Think of them as warm-up sketches, ideas tested and discarded. External sounds that arrive now are more likely to be absorbed than ignored. A distant noise might briefly influence the emotional tone of a dream fragment, then vanish. The brain acknowledges the signal, decides it doesn't matter, and moves on without escalating. Historians still argue whether humans once slept more lightly in the first part of the night, saving their deepest rest for later hours. Modern sleep studies suggest that deep sleep clusters early, while REM dominates later. If ancient people organized watch schedules or communal sleep accordingly, it would have aligned neatly with biology. Clever if true. Your muscles are relaxed to the point where they almost feel absent. Signals from limbs and joints are minimized. Movement is unnecessary. Any adjustment that was needed has already been made. The body has settled into a configuration it expects to maintain for a while. Another mainstream fact: growth hormone release peaks during deep sleep. This hormone supports tissue repair, immune function, and overall recovery. It doesn't care how old you are. It still shows up for its shift. Sleep is not a luxury, it's a repair window. Historians still argue whether the phrase beauty sleep accidentally captured a real physiological truth. Cellular repair, skin regeneration, hormonal balance all benefit from this phase. Vanity aside, maintenance matters. Your brain now becomes far less responsive to novelty. New sounds, new sensations, unless extreme, fail to register. This protects the integrity of deep sleep. Without it, rest would fragment endlessly. The listening brain lowers its sensitivity deliberately, trusting that truly important signals will still break through. Scholars still debate how the brain decides what qualifies as important enough during deep sleep. Volume alone isn't enough. Familiarity, emotional relevance, and sudden change all play a role. The algorithm is complex, adaptive, and entirely unconscious. You don't experience this decision-making. You experience nothing, and that nothing is precious. As the night progresses, this deep state will eventually loosen, making room for lighter sleep and dreams again. The cycle will repeat, just as it always does. Rise, sink, shift, replay. Listen. You will not feel the hours passing. You will not feel the work being done. You will simply wake later with the quiet sense that something has been completed. Historians still argue whether humans ever truly appreciated sleep while inside it, or only after it was disturbed. Perhaps sleep was never meant to be admired in the moment. Perhaps its value lies precisely in how invisible it is. Your brain is not asking for recognition. It is executing a role refined over millions of nights across countless bodies in conditions far harsher than your comfortable room. Tonight is easy by comparison. The system is grateful for that. Signals continue to arrive. Most are dismissed. A few are noted. None require action. The listening brain is steady now, fully immersed in its task. Conscious awareness is gone, not lost, just resting, like a tool set carefully aside. And so the night deepens around you, quiet and complete, as the cycle prepares for its final turn. You drift onward, held securely by a brain that never truly sleeps, doing what it has always done best, keeping watch while you disappear for a while. You are so deep in it now that even the idea of depth has softened. There is no edge to this moment, no clear center either. Just a steady, enveloping quiet where the night feels complete. Not empty, complete. The listening brain has settled into its most efficient rhythm, the one it saves for when nothing needs to change and everything simply needs to continue. This is where signals fade into comfort. A mainstream scientific fact is that during the deepest, most stable portions of sleep, brain activity becomes highly synchronized across large regions. Neurons fire together in slow, rolling patterns, creating a state that is both resilient and restorative. This synchrony is one reason deep sleep is so hard to interrupt. The brain isn't scattered, it's unified. Disturbing it would take something genuinely important. Historians still argue whether ancient humans described this state as dreamless sleep because it felt like nothing, or because nothing needed to be felt. When experience collapses into uniformity, language loses its grip. There is no story to tell here, no imagery to report, just a gentle absence of demand. External signals still exist, but they have lost their sharpness. A sound becomes vibration without meaning. A sensation becomes pressure without urgency. The brain registers these inputs the way you register the hum of a refrigerator while deeply relaxed, technically aware, functionally uninterested. Here's a quirky tidbit that fits beautifully. Studies suggest that during deep sleep, the brain's capacity for conscious perception is not gone, but gated behind such high thresholds that only the most intense or relevant stimuli can pass. It's not that the door is locked, it's just very, very heavy, and no one is in a hurry to open it. One historians still argue whether this is the truest form of rest humans ever experience. Not distraction, not pleasure, just sustained non-urgency. In a world that constantly demands reaction, this state may be the rarest luxury of all. Your body has become almost theoretical now, weightless in feeling, though fully supported. Muscles are so relaxed that the brain barely tracks their position. Joint signals are quiet. Skin sensation blends into warmth. The boundaries that usually define you soften, not disappearing, but losing relevance. The listening brain does not interpret this as loss. It interprets it as success. Inside, maintenance continues. Cells repair. Metabolic byproducts are cleared more efficiently. Immune signals circulate. Networks strengthen and prune themselves, reinforcing what matters and letting go of what doesn't. This is not passive time. It is foundational time. Historians still argue whether humans evolved to sleep longer when conditions allowed, precisely because this state offered such profound benefits. When danger was low and resources sufficient, the brain could afford to sink fully into restoration. Tonight, you are fortunate. Conditions are good enough. Signals from memory are quiet now. The replay has slowed. Emotional processing has eased. Whatever needed attention earlier has either been handled or postponed. The brain is no longer sorting. It is sustaining. There are no dreams here in the usual sense. If imagery appears at all, it is fleeting and abstract, shapes without edges, feelings without stories. These fragments don't linger. They dissolve almost as soon as they form, leaving no trace. Historians still argue whether the absence of dreams was once considered the purest sleep. In some traditions, dreamless rest was seen as the highest form of renewal, a return to something fundamental. Modern neuroscience doesn't rank sleep that way, but it does agree that this state is uniquely powerful. External time is passing. Internally, it is not. Without conscious tracking, minutes and hours are identical. The brain has stepped outside the need to measure. There is only continuity. Here's another small, grounding detail. Heart rate variability tends to increase during deep sleep, reflecting a flexible, well-regulated nervous system. The heart does not beat monotonously. It adapts gently, moment to moment, responding to internal rhythms rather than external demands. This flexibility is a sign of health, of resilience. Historians still argue whether ancient healers sensed this connection intuitively when they prescribed rest as medicine. Long before measurements and monitors, people noticed that sleep restored what effort depleted. The explanation came later. The effect was always obvious. Your breathing is so steady now that it feels like part of the room itself, rising and falling in quiet cooperation with the space around you. You are not breathing. Breathing is happening. Signals from the outside world that once felt sharp, light, sound, temperature, are now smoothed into a single background condition. Safe enough. That is all the listening brain needs to know. Scholars still debate whether the brain ever truly stops predicting during this state. Even here, some models suggest it maintains a minimal representation of the world, just in case. A prediction, after all, is its primary skill. But if it is predicting now, it is doing so lazily, without urgency, like someone half aware that morning will come eventually and unconcerned about when. You are as close as you will ever be to complete disengagement without ceasing to exist as yourself. And yet, you are perfectly held, monitored, protected. The listening brain does not abandon you in this quiet. It stands watch precisely so you don't have to. Historians still argue whether humans have always trusted sleep this much. Fear of the dark, fear of vulnerability. These are ancient too. But trust won out often enough for sleep to remain essential. You are here because generations before you closed their eyes and trusted the night. As the hours continue, this depth will eventually loosen. The brain will shift. Cycles will turn. Lighter sleep will return. Then dreams. Then the long, careful path back toward waking. But none of that is relevant now. Now there is only rest. Signals have thinned to whispers, and even the whispers are fading into something softer than sound. More like a feeling of being undisturbed. The brain is no longer choosing what to listen to. It is listening to almost nothing. This is not emptiness. It is saturation. The system has everything it needs. And so you remain here, suspended in this gentle unknowing, where effort has no place and awareness is unnecessary. The world is still out there. The brain is still listening. Time is still moving. You are simply not required to participate. Nothing more needs to be said. Nothing more needs to happen. You rest.